swinging through for a free lunch with the Mr. Larry Elder right when we come
Breakfast.
back.
Breakfast.
Oh, breakfast. Oh my goodness. I'm all over the place. It's okay. It's all right. Right when we come back. How about I mess up the whole title because I'm ready to get it, right? When you have Chris Samuel, apologist in Detroit, and Adam come on your channel, you gotta do your thing. Pastor Brandon was not able to make it with us tonight. He could possibly drop in, but he told us to go ahead and hold it down uh, in his absence, in his possible absence. So we intend to do that, but he could drop in. But he has promised to, uh, get into some shenanigans in the future on this channel. Should he not be able to make it tonight? But how are you guys doing? We got a apologist in Detroit and Mr. Scott Lane, Black Bruce Wayne himself. How y'all doing tonight?
Doing good. You taking it back with that one, man. Scott
I,
Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne. You're taking it back.
Look, I came up on the True ID podcast. I was inspired by it, man. I many a days working on the door line, listening to the True ID podcast, trying not to lose my mind.
I appreciate it, bro. I appreciate it. Doing good, man. Doing good.
Hey.
Chris Samuel, how's it going now?
I keep my head high. No, let me stop. Little J. Cole, apparently. I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Happy to be here and do what we do. It's a Freestyle Friday where we spit from the dome, critiquing, social commentary, political commentary, coming from a biblical perspective. Happy to have my boy, the homie, Adam Coleman here to, join in the shenanigans tonight. Hope to have a good balance of, very recognizing the actual gravity of it, but at the same time, have a little fun, do a little bit of joking. Y'all know me. I like to try to keep things light if at all possible, but respectful, always respectful. So.
Amen.
Hey, I appreciate y'all having me aboard, man. For real. Like I appreciate the Freestyle Fridays is always entertaining and educational. So I'm just trying to, put my little 2 cents in,
Well, I've been meaning to get Adam to come on the channel. I'll reach out to him like, hey man, what your calendar looking like in a couple of weeks? And everybody's probably gonna be tired of me by now. I do the same thing with Nick Quint. So Nick will be coming on the channel next because I gotta stop. I gotta be a little bit more committed to the cause. But whenever we do get my brothers, whenever we do get Chris Samuel on here, it's very serious. It's very heavy. The gravity is there, and we get a good diet of the biblical worldview. And speaking of, go ahead, bro.
Before you jump in, I got a quick comment. It's random. This guy, and no one knows that I'm going to say this, so don't fault anybody else for saying this. I saw that Tim Stratton liked the picture that you posted earlier after you tagged everybody in it. I think that he would be a great guest for us to have on here one day to kind of interact with. Pritchett liked the picture. I think the Pritchett would be a great guest. And then we had Nick Quinn on last time. I think Nick's always a good voice to kind of bring in an echo. I know that sometimes when we get on, when we have these Freestyle Fridays, most of us kind of are synergistic in the perspective that we're kind of coming from. And then I know some of those guys have maybe slight nuance, different approaches to the way they see some of these things. And I just think it would be super cool to have like that kind of like old school Hannity and Combs kind of vibe where you're kind of coming from two different perspectives, but it's real civil and it's genuinely aimed at glorifying God and bringing about espousing biblical truth. So if any of y'all watching the show, that's an invitation. Y'all welcome to come on any day and to participate and to chop it up with us. Love y'all. There you go.
Amen.
Man, I think that'd be fire, man. Tim is a good friend of mine that I've known for years at this point. Tim Stratton, really good guy. John the Pritchett is a really good guy. I've called on him, multiple times, and just chat about various different things. Love him, love his perspective, and I do think that it's always better to have different voices around the table to, like the scripture say, man, reason together. We have too much conflict in the body right now, I think, where people aren't bridging those gaps and having, the tough conversations. So I mean, I would love to see that. I would love to see that.
Awesome. And I'll
Yeah, I
be
love those guys, man.
hanging out with Adam Coleman and Tim Stratton and Dr. Pritchett and Dr. Braxton Hunter, Eric Hernandez here in a few weeks. So hopefully we'll be able to make that happen. I'm gonna go and be gracious, season my words with grace, all that good stuff. But now we gonna hang out. We're gonna hang out. So
that's right. That's right. Don't be rubbing
time.
people the wrong way, Matthew. Don't be messing up my invitations.
I ain't gonna do that. All right,
but I'm getting old. These are actually reading glasses, just for anybody that.
It's not just for style. I thought it was a style thing, man. I thought
no,
it was,
they're literally reading glasses.
Flexing,
Last time I went to the optometrist, they like, yeah, you could probably use some readers now. I'm gonna give you a prescription for your regular glasses and then separate prescription for your readers. And so I keep these down here at my desk.
Hey, man, we all getting there, Doc. Lord willing. So nothing wrong with that.
Goodness. I thought she was crazy when she told me that, and then as soon as I started reading afterwards, I was like.
Oh.
And then I stuck these glasses on. I was like, oh man, that's so much better.
If Adam's running for president, I'll be his deacon of defense.
That's right. What was that movie with it was with Bernie Mac and Chris Rock when he was running for president, and Bernie Mac was his brother, and both vice president.
I know this isn't it. I don't know why I was thinking about Bulworth at first, but
no, that was Halle Berry and Bulworth. Yeah, that was a good one too.
Yeah.
Now Bernie Mac is vice president.
I know what you're talking about.
That's what I thought of, Matthew, when you said you're gonna be his brother.
He's gonna be Bernie Mac. Remember, he gets off the train slapping everybody.
Right,
you know what I mean?
I'm just like
Texas.
Most Def when he was working for David Chappelle with the yellow cake.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
all right. Don't you drop that yellow cake.
That yellow cake. All right, y'all. If you could do me a kind favor, please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. But please share this video. Let's go ahead and do that and get some thumbs up. Just want to say what's up to the chat. But without further ado,
actually, you know me, I love to kind of give, because there's certain things like I feel like, particularly the more guests we have on, that limits the amount of opportunity we have for commentary. And when we have a guest on, we always want to offer them kind of the first voice. And so I think it's helpful to kind of open the show with maybe a minute or two, just general commentary about the overall video, where we may not like necessarily delve into particulars, or you might mention something that we're not going to have time to discuss in it, which I have two things to point out in regards to that. So, as usual, I would offer Adam, if you got any general comments about the video, any general thoughts about it, please feel free to share. And then Matthew, you can go, and then I'll finish this up.
Yeah, I was getting ready to tee that right up to y'all. I'm gonna keep my opening comments limited, but y'all got it. Go ahead. Yeah. What? Adam's the guest. So, Adam, man, why are we here? Why are you on here today?
Yeah, so one of the things I realized, man, and I appreciate the way that you framed it, Chris, because I do think that there are some bird's eye view points to be made before we get into the details of the video. And I guess I would just say this is probably one of my pet peeves, or just something that maybe I just feel strongly about right now. And that is the fact that I think that when it comes to the Black Christian voice in the public square, and by I mean somebody who is thoroughly orthodox in their theology, committed to living it out in their lives, church folk, you know what I mean? People who are truly connected to the ecclesia, church, capital C, and people who are representing kind of like the Black voice, Black meaning the best of what the African American ethnicity, or maybe we could broaden that out to Africans of the diaspora. The best of what we can be ethnically, which I think is realized through Christ. Actually, I don't think that to name the name of Jesus as Lord is to expunge one's ethnic self. I think that it actually enables you to live out the best of the Imago Dei and the best of your ethnic self, if you will. I think the culture is beautiful, and you can be the best of that through Christ. I think that that being what I mean by Black Christian voice, I think that voice has been um, just not heard, if not maybe stifled or muffled when it comes to public discourse. And that's really what's missing in a lot of these conversations. I think that you have people like a Larry Elder who, if I'm going to be charitable, perhaps, he's a Christian. I genuinely don't know. I've heard people say that he has professed to be a Christian. I have not heard that, but I don't really follow him like that. Um, Perhaps he's just giving service to Christianity. I think many conservatives do give lip service to it. Um, I would say the same thing about a Candace Owens and so forth. But when it comes to somebody who is thinking through social issues, thinking through policy, thinking through the boots on the ground of what an ideology can offer, in terms of how it plays out in society, and keeping track of what the Bible has to say throughout that. I think that voice is woefully missing. And so when it comes to apologetics, even making a case for Christianity, and commending to people the value of the biblical worldview, I think that one of the things that I've been that I would like to see more in my channel, and hope to infuse more in my channel, is giving voice to that perspective, because I think it helps people to see the viability of the biblical worldview. Lastly, I'll say, and forgive me if I'm like babbling a bit, but I think that what happens is, in the absence of that voice, in the absence of truly Christian voices, and I think something you could make a mirror statement to what I'm saying when it comes to any ethnicity, what I mean. But in the absence of that voice, I think there's a vacuum that's truly problematic. I think that you have people who are pseudo Christians, if Christians at all, or actually, I guess if you're a pseudo Christian, you're not a Christian, but pseudo Christians, or who believe that somehow conservatism and Christianity go hand in hand, and it's almost indistinguishable for them, and they err, when it comes to things that matter with regard to human flourishing and morality in the public square. I think that there are people who are so-called progressives, who hijack or co-opt certain values that flow from the biblical worldview and what it means to keep track of the Imago Dei. They co-opt certain pieces of that, and maybe claim to be Christians, and they err. They err when it comes to how things play out in the public square. And so much of the conversation becomes about Democrat versus Republican, conservative versus progressive, and I think that we end up missing what does the Bible say? What does the Bible bring to bear with respect to economics, abortion, marriage, all these hot button topics and so forth. And so I think that Larry Elder is an unfortunate example of what happens when you have somebody who's loud, but not necessarily committed to the dictates of Scripture.
Go ahead, Chris. What you got?
Okay, I'll jump in. So yeah, amen, Adam, amen. I mean, heartily. Some of the things that kind of stuck out to me with this video was, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, kind of later on, maybe in my closing commentary thoughts. Sometimes I feel like these people they have never read the Bible, because they seem to demonize, certain virtues that the Bible espouse. They seem to have an ethics system that's completely opposite of the what the Bible actually says. So that's always confusing to me when it comes to the majority, the moral majority, the people who consider themselves as those who represent true virtue, genuine virtue, and righteousness and genuine justice, that they can get things so wrong, because there's often sort of this muddling between that and the Christian right in America. They kind of muddle with the secular right. It's hard to make a distinction between the two at times, that you kind of alluded to with, we don't even know what Larry Elder is. That said, there were a couple times where Charlemagne asked him, what do white people do wrong? And I felt like Larry kind of obfuscated. Well, I'm here to talk about, problems in the Black community, but I felt like Charlemagne was actually alluding to a legitimate point. It's like you seem to have a narrative that you're pushing here, and you'll look, or at least sound, more balanced if you can identify something that shows that you're aware of other things as well, versus you're just coming across as very it's very driven for your narrative. That's one.
Mm-hmm.
another thing that kind of stood out to me was like, let's just say that his shtick, his main point was fatherlessness is at the root of all of these problems. What in the world can you do as the president to resolve that problem? I'm curious. Like, like, to me, it's one thing for you to identify this is a problem, or this is the problem of problems, and to kind of flesh out what that looks like. It's a whole nother thing to say, if I'm elected in office, which is what he's there for. He's running for presidency of the United States, to say, if I'm elected, this is what I'm going to do to fix it. He came across as a guy that was just kind of belly aching about something that he sees as problematic. And
Right.
then so I guess I'll kind of cap it at that. It really, people like Larry Elder, Candace Owens, Carol Swain often come across as just people who are you know, with ulterior motives. They have an axe to grind about something. To me, they don't come across as people who are genuinely benevolent or altruistic. They come across more so as people who are, leveraging something that the public cares about to make some money. And I know that that's a big accusation, and I don't know any of those people, so I can't
Yeah.
genuinely say that that's genuinely what's going on there. What I am saying is that from outward appearance, that's what it seems like. None of these guys seem like they are genuinely people who care about society or want to make a difference in society. And I think that in many cases, you need look no further than their personal lives. Their personal lives seem to have very notable red flags that show, their character. So anyway,
Mm.
and you can go look
And
that up for
can I
yourself
just
if
say
you're
something?
interested.
Can I just say something too, Chris? Because I know we actually have to get to the video, but just real quick, honestly, I was a little bit late in watching the video. I saw that he was on the Breakfast Club, and I just hadn't watched it, and then I saw a lot of people commenting about it. I think it was Officer Tatum had a video where he said that Larry Elder obliterates Charlemagne the God, and I saw somebody else say that Larry Elder eviscerates Charlemagne. And just a lot of people were talking about how he just came through and just kind of ran roughshod over the folks, the hosts of that show. And upon watching the video, I just didn't really get that impression. I didn't really see what everybody was talking about. I mean, to be honest, if he did, I don't really feel like that would be a big thing to take a victory lap about. Like, just because those particular persons, no diss to Charlemagne, but I mean, he's not, you know, the kind of person that I think is that you would think would be super astute in the matters that they were discussing. I mean, he's an interviewer, no disrespect to him, but I mean, honestly, I just didn't really feel like it was like this blowout showing, for Larry Elder. I do think that if you came into it um, a fan of his perspective, I think he gave voice to what people believed, and in doing so, I could see why they'd be like, yeah, rah rah. But I just didn't really get that perspective, that perception to me.
Yeah,
I don't understand where they came from.
it reminded me of like we engaged this cult in the African American community called the Hebrew Israelites.
Yeah.
One of the sects, the IUIC, have what's called known as a precept packet. So they have like a list of talking points that they
Yeah.
are trained to talk on.
Right.
So if you just let them talk, they sound like they're making sense. And if
Right.
you're with them, you're like, amen, yeah,
Yeah.
he's
Yeah. Yeah.
winning. But if you're I think I would argue, if you're thinking clearly, if you're open-minded and you're thinking clearly, and there's a back and forth and you allow for critique, I think that there's going to be some rocks and some shoes. There's going to be some points that are made,
Exactly. Right.
and in spite of the fact that I would say, in the case of the Breakfast Club, they weren't ready for that precept pack. I
That's
think
true. Yeah.
that conservative precept pack, I think that they nonetheless had, like, when he at one particular point where Larry Elder asks, well, if systemic racism exists, give me an example of it. He's like, I don't know, it's so many of them off the top of my head. Prisons, right? And I'm like, Larry Elder barely interacted with that. He gave a little bit of response, but he
Right. Right.
barely
Right. Right.
interacted with that. And I'm like, man, that was actually a powerful point he made, and we'll get into that when we get into it. But go
Yeah.
ahead, Matthew. We've been talking a little
Yeah.
bit.
I
You
gotta
haven't
take
had
some
an
pizzas
opportunity
out the
to.
oven. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back, y'all.
Do you think? Do you think?
Um, and I'm not going to say too much on top of that. Just want to recognize some of the people in the chat. Grace and Peace, Nick. Grace and Peace, Mr. Phil Fox. I'm glad all y'all can make it. Please share and subscribe if you haven't. But yeah, much to what both of you have already said, especially what Adam said. Uh, Charlemagne and his crew. I mean, they are entertainers. their primary vocation is entertainment radio host. Um, so I mean, know that we're not ready for the precept package, but I mean, I don't really think that we would expect them uh, to be ready. So there wasn't much offered from there, um, but as a Christian black man, right? As a Christian black man, I do get some of the legitimate concerns that one would have for the left and the right. And um, the main goal for tonight is to try to do our best to look at this through a biblical lens, and the biblical lens is going to look at all the observable facts that are true about reality, and just let the chips fall where they may, and hopefully you'll be on the right side of justice when it's all said and done. So with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and tee up the video, and we'll have a little fun.
Which us you starting at the 1 minute and 5 second mark, right?
I thought you had 40. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was a small. It was like a 5 second clip, and
Okay.
and I decided to kind of add that to my opening comment, so you can skip over that.
Okay.
That was matter of fact, um, I did not add that to my opening comments, but it's a real simple point. It's like, when was America great? He said that he's a make America great candidate, and so I always kind of retort that with like, well, when was America great? Because I think that's I never hear them explain when America was great. Because the further that you go back into history, the more glaring the issues that we're all talking about become. So, like, at what point, where exactly is this utopian American? Let's just call them values. Let's just take away the actual experience. But where exactly was the American values that people weren't living consistent with these utopian values? Where exactly was that? When was America great? Somebody who holds to this view that America was once great, please explain that to me. All right. You
And
started,
and
you
for
started
and
105.
and for whom was it great for? I think that's a good
Well,
question.
it has to be great for everybody in order for it to be great, So, I'm assuming that they recognize that. You can't just say it was great for one group of people, knowing that there was an atrocity being committed, So anyway, go ahead and pop it to 105, and let's jump in there.
All right, so let's go ahead and do this. You good, Adam?
Yeah, just one of my lights just went out, so I gotta plug it up. But yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Got a little dark. See the shade coming. All right. And here we go.
For example, the number one social problem in America by far is the epidemic not of COVID, but of fatherlessness. 70% of black kids today enter the world without a father in the home married to the mother, up from 25% back in 1965. Now 25% of white kids enter the world today without a father in the home married to the mother. And the stats are clear. Even Barack Obama once cited them. If you're raised without a dad, you're 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. What's happened? In the mid-60s, with I think the best of intentions, a Democrat named Lyndon Johnson.
All right, so and we're going to keep playing it right after a brief few comments. But right then and there, he says that the biggest problem in African American in culture today is fatherlessness. Chris, I'm gonna tee this one up to you, and take as much time as you need.
No, guess first. Adam
Okay.
good to go first.
Okay.
If you have any comments, if you don't have any comments on it, you don't have to.
Yeah, so some of my comments I'm going to save for, with respect to that, I'll save for another clip that I know we're going to touch on. I will say this though, just for the sake of getting it out there. So first of all, and I think you guys would agree, like I don't think any of us would just kind of wink at fatherlessness as being like not a problem or not a serious problem. I mean, I've spoken on it publicly in some of my presentations. Boom, there you go. I take fatherhood very seriously. I do think that it is a major problem, not only in the African American community, but certainly in the African American community. I do think that there's a problem in terms of fathers being married to the moms of their children and sticking in there. I think that's a real issue, and so I don't think that you have to. I don't disagree, with Larry Elder that it is an issue and a major issue. Now, where I take issue with him, and I'll just kind of camp out here because, like I said, I'll address this a little bit further in a later clip that I believe we'll touch on. Where I take issue with him is saying that it is the problem, or like he treats it as if it's like exclusively the worst problem. You know what I'm saying, or maybe just the most major problem. I think that's a little that's overly simplistic. One of the things that I'm interested in is explanations. That's really what we want to be looking for. We want to be looking for explanations as to why the African American community is where it is. Explanations in terms of why other communities, including the white community, is where it is. He brings up, like Asians and so forth. Like, why are these communities where they are economically in terms of social conditions? And I think in order to provide adequate explanations, to that question, you can't do so by appealing solely or even primarily to fatherlessness. There are some other pieces to the puzzle that intersect with the issue of fatherlessness for sure. But if we're going to really do justice to the social condition, economic condition of African Americans, and what's going to make things better, then we can't afford to give overly simplistic explanations that leave out other parts that are necessary to address in order for African Americans to move forward. And I think that's what he does. I think that he's kind of got a bag lunch of conservatism that sounds real good and it's kind of like in sound bites. But if we're really serious about dealing with these issues, I think that he's just being overly simplistic, and for that reason, I think that he's kind of in wanting, if you will, of being a serious thinker on this issue.
And I think one of the things that he does initially is he does a timeline, and he goes like back in the 60s it was 25% for African Americans, and now it's like 70 something percent fatherlessness for African Americans, and now it's 25% for white Americans. But I asked the question, well, is 25% epidemic? Because in my mind, if the problem, which he goes on to explain some of the outcomes that he thinks that he says are causally related to this fatherlessness epidemic, to me, the 25% in and of itself is epidemic and problematic for an entire society. Needless to say, even if you park those percentages for a moment on the side, if a cursory reflection of the history of America reveals to us that when we're looking at whatever that number might be for African Americans, it did not transpire in a vacuum. Long before at the onset of this country of people migrating to this country from Europe, at the onset of that was this atrocity of slavery in many majority of the African Americans that found themselves here on this land, on this continent, found themselves here by virtue of being imported as property. And implicit within that is the reality that families isn't a priority. Keeping families together isn't a priority. Selling people off like they're chattel is what actually transpired. So, that didn't happen. Whatever that number is, it didn't happen in a vacuum. There are many factors that we know impacted it. Right after that, when you go through 102 years up to 1965 from emancipation to the civil rights, where 102 years of very detrimental, unjust treatment, and many of these treatments, in many of these ways that they were treated, impacted how people. The marriage rates that happen for African Americans. I mean, you need look no further than to study the Great Migration. You recognize that many men from the South, as they were escaping the oppression of the South and moving up north to try to establish lives, unfortunately, often those guys abandon their families and establish new families while they were up in the north. That impacts marriage rates. That impacts fatherhood in this country. So I think that it's disingenuous to talk about those numbers as though those numbers, the 25%, the 70%, just happened in the vacuum, just happenstance, or that these people just developed a culture that produced these results. The reality is that there are factors, external factors, that have always contributed to the disparity in the disparity differences between African Americans and our other counterparts, Asian, white American, European American, of any ilk. there's always been our numbers have always been more despairing than other people groups. So I think that I think it's disingenuous for Larry Elder to sit there and just talk about this as though this is a internal problem within the Black community and not something that is much more complex than when you just actually look at the history and how these numbers came about and how these numbers have never been equal. So to sit there, just the very first two numbers that you mentioned, when you compare and contrast whites versus African Americans in '65, and you contrast that later on, what you see is it's always been a gap. So yeah, I just think that's kind of point number one, where we're kind of looking at these when we're looking at these issues, we have to see them in their historical context in order to see the problem.
So here's the thing, though, Chris, and I agree with everything you just said. But what I think is funny, I'm going to coin a term here. I'm going to misuse a philosophical term and just co-opt it real quick. But I want to talk about historical or economic epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism is this term, like in the philosophy of mind, where it's like essentially like the brain. It's like our thoughts don't really cause anything. Our brain causes our thoughts, but our thoughts don't really have any impact on behavior. And I think that what happens is there's a kind of version of that when it comes to people like Larry Elder and the cases they make. They act as if history just has no effects, when it comes to how communities are formed, or somehow something like poverty, mass poverty back in the day just is impotent to impact the people who are subjected to it, or when it comes, so economics, or when it comes to, historical events. But when you think about it, like the whole "Make America Great Again," like you were talking about before, when was America great? That statement. When people say "Make it great again," they're assuming that there are things that they could do now that will impact the future in such a way that America will be great. Well, I'm saying the same thing. There are things that were done back in the day that affected our today. So in the same way that you would believe that what you do today will create a better tomorrow, I'm saying that people back in the day created a worse present. I'm saying, at least in regards to some of the things that were enacted through policy, law, and so on and so forth. So I don't know why people act like it's this foreign concept. That there is certainly, like you said, that behaviors, and culture develop somehow in a vacuum. Like that's nearly impossible. And Thomas Sowell does the same thing. It's very strange to me, but I just kind of want to toss that in.
Yeah. I'm actually going to quote Glenn Lowry real quick. And I got a quote for you guys out of Glenn Lowry's book, The Anatomy of Racial Inequality. Now, Glenn Lowry is not a liberal. He's a conservative. But he says in his book, he says, any moral analyst of any sophistication ought to recognize that societies are not amalgamations of unrelated individuals creating themselves anew out of whole cloth, as it were, in each generation. A complex web of social connections and a long train of historical influences interact to form the opportunities and shape the outlooks of individuals. And so, yeah, I mean, like you guys already said, these, and Glenn Lowry is probably more of the reasonable types. But the point is, these things are not autonomous. Culture is not some autonomous entity. And the fact of the matter is also what Larry Elder is regurgitating. It was said by Lyndon B. Johnson and Patrick Moynihan. Patrick Moynihan is the author of the cultural poverty thesis. He was talking about fatherlessness in the 1960s. And usually folks say that basically it's almost a way of blaming the community. And here it is, for the record, every person on this panel believe in the importance of fathers.
Absolutely.
I think just the evidence is there that it helps. The evidence is there that you need fathers. From a biblical standpoint of special revelation and also what we can glean from general revelation. Nevertheless, this is the same old talking points that they were pushing back then.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go, any other words before we continue? Yep. All right.
I got something for this next one now.
Uh-oh.
Adam get to go first.
No. Hey, do your thing.
All right, here we go.
Johnson launched what he called the war on poverty. And since then, we have incentivized women to marry the government and incentivized men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. You know, when I say this to people, the pushback I get.
Okay, so you want me to keep playing this a little bit more, Chris, or
Keep going. I'll
Okay.
tell you when to stop.
Is, well, there are lots of things that are going on: systemic racism, poverty. Here's the problem. If you look at a young black male aged 10 to 43, that's young to me because I'm 70.
You can stop it there. You go ahead and stop
A
it
young
there.
black
Okay. Go ahead, Adam, if you got. So basically, he just said
No,
that.
go for it.
No, I just want to reiterate what he just said. He just said what happened is in the mid '60s, with the best of intentions, Lyndon B. Johnson launched the war on poverty. Since then, we have incentivized women, black women, he's referring to marry the government and incentivize black men to abandon their moral and financial responsibility. Lyndon Johnson was president from 1963 through 1969. For those who want to kind of wrap their minds around the timeline. But no, you go ahead and go first, and then I'll jump in. I always want to give our guests the opportunity to kind of share first. So.
Well, I'll just say real briefly, and then I'll chime off of where you're going with it. But again, to whatever extent, Lyndon B. Johnson's policies undermine the family, shame on the government for enacting such policies and mishandling, trying to bring a solution. He says that he thinks it's with the best intentions. Honestly, I don't really know that to be true. I genuinely don't know. But and then also, whatever person's I guess, a lot of their families just slip apart, I mean, it gets incentivized by the government, shame on them too. Like, I don't think that the family, again, we don't have to come against the fact that the family is important in order to point to that and other factors that are also important, and I think that I get that it's a convenient talking point, conservative talking point. I just don't think that a clear thinker is going to rest their hat on that in terms of being the bulk of their explanation as to why things are the way they are. But actually, I'll camp out there. And I'll let you shoot for it, and then I'll come back.
Matthew, you want to go first?
Nah, man, you take your time. You're not on no clock.
Just make sure.
Preach, preacher. Take your time.
Here's okay. I got a couple of I got a couple of issues here. One is, okay, he goes on in the interview, and we're going to listen to a kind of an extended clip which picks up right where we just left off there next. Okay, and so he's going to go a little bit further into it and get a little pushback on who actually created the policies, and so he puts it squarely on Lyndon B. Johnson. But have you ever heard of SNAP? Right? Does anybody know what SNAP is? Do either of you know what SNAP is? The Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. That's that funny money from the 80s and the 90s called food stamps. You know who came up with food stamps? Richard Nixon, the succeeding president after Lyndon B. Johnson. Have you ever heard of women and children? You know what that you know what the acronym for women and children is? Women, infants, and children. WIC. Guess who came up with that one? Oh, Mr. Republican Richard Nixon. So his narrative, and these are federally these were instituted on a federal level, and they've been implemented during a Republican president, and they've been in place ever since then, and they've only been expanded since they've been in place. So it's disingenuous for him to squarely place all of the blame for social programs on the Democrats, because Republicans came up with social programs. It was kind of the thing to do at the time. The country was a little upset with the government about war. They needed distraction. Poverty was a big issue within the country. And so people who were in politics and in charge, what do you want to do? You want to cater to the people. So guess what? It wasn't simply Democrats who came up with welfare. Republicans contributed to welfare as well. So that's a lie. I don't know if he knows that or if it just doesn't fit his narrative. Okay, that's one point. Two, he's talking about, he's claiming that this institution of welfare is or this introduction of welfare is what undermined the Black family and what caused the absence of Black fathers in the families. What, does anybody know what the campaign theme was for Richard Nixon? What was the campaign theme that he ran on to get elected? It's
I
tough
am
on
not a
crime.
crook. No, I'm
Tough
kidding. I'm
on
joking.
crime. No, it was tough on
I know,
crime.
too.
So there was the war on poverty, and there was the war on crime. So from late 60s, 1970s, all the way through 2000, the majority of our presidents were Republican presidents, and with those Republican presidents came the war on crime, the war on drugs, and tough on crime in the late 80s, early 90s, which didn't really end until the 2000s when they started to undo all of the work. Well, guess who was impacted the most by the war on tough on crime, the war on drugs, and the war on crime? Guess who was impacted by that? What I mean is, guess who ended up in prison with all three of those wars? Who's the primary criminal?
Black
was
men.
It was the black man. It was the black man. Now, one of the retorts to this point is that, well, they didn't spend a whole lot of time in prison, because they have statistics on prison sentences. A lot of these prison sentences are like 3 months, 6 months, and such. That's only half of the story. The other half of the story is that they were labeled with this stigmatic label of felon. And if once you're labeled with that felon, it's nebulous. Did he murder somebody? Did he rape somebody? Did he rob a bank? What in the world does felon actually mean? That's a very nebulous. That's a very broad category. Felon of things that can fall in felony, like having a marijuana joint. You're a felon from a marijuana joint, and you might only spend 3 to 6 months in prison. But if you can read a book like I forget her name. I got the book right here.
The New Jim Crow.
The New Jim Crow. That's it. Not Elizabeth Wilkinson. What's her name? The lawyer from New Jim Crow. But it'll come to me in a second. Anyway,
Michelle Alexander.
Michelle Alexander, right? So you got the New Jim Crow. The problem is, once you get this stigma of a felon, it's hard to find a job. You don't qualify for public assistance. You lose your right to vote and to participate in the political system in many states. Becoming a felon, basically, on a very practical level, disqualifies you from being a viable candidate in a marriage relationship. So even if a guy wanted to be a husband, what type of husband can he be if he can't be gainfully employed to take care of his family? So while Larry Elder wants to place the blame of men not holding their financial or responsibility of being the father, I don't think that you can actually. I think that you can make a better case. I'm arguing this. I think you can make a better case that the real reason that the family fell apart in the African American community, you can attribute that to the war on crime, the war on drugs, and the war tough on crime. These three, this 40-year period of time where legislation was being put in place that had a impact on African American men that effectively, practically disqualified them from being candidates for marriage. So I don't think that, even if you argue that welfare was a part of it, that might have supplemented the absence of these men. It certainly doesn't. It doesn't address the issue that these men weren't qualified because of the fact that they were felons. And then this felon label that they have, they're being rolled back now. Many states are now wiping off this felon status for things like marijuana, which was one of the most common reasons that that black men actually had this felon status. So yeah, I think that again, Larry Elder, he has his narrative that he's pushing, and part of that narrative is that African Americans have brought a lot of the calamities and the problems on themselves, and almost as though they've done that in a vacuum, where there was the external factors that under normal circumstances we would all agree contributes to these type of things, as though they had nominal impact on the results. I just think that Larry Elder seems to be too intelligent of a man to not be aware of some of this. And again, as I stated in my opening comments, this is part of the reason why I struggle to not see him as a person who has alternative motives and who genuinely doesn't care about what he's talking about. He cares more about his potential ability to gain some sort of advantage from talking about these things and actually caring about these things. All right, so I'm gonna leave it at that and let you guys jump in and kind of share some thoughts.
But let me just also say this. I mean, welfare really wasn't the problem until Black people started getting it.
Yeah, that's what I want to say too. Like he act like Black people was the only one getting welfare. like somehow these policies, the war on poverty, the policies were somehow written only for Black people. I don't know that to be true. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Somebody could correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe that to be the case. But I'm sorry. Go ahead, man.
Save Luke Dowdy's question for later. I'm gonna save that one for later for when we're answering questions, because I think it's a relevant question for us to kind of interact with.
But I mean, we all know what was going on with the parties, back in the day. Many of these social programs were not a problem until Black people gained access to it, which is partially what Lyndon B. Johnson did in his Great Society, and many of those Great Society programs were gutted once Nixon and especially Reagan got in. Reagan gutted all that. So I'm scratching my head like, what programs? Head Start is actually a good program. Head Start benefited a lot of kids, and the stats will show. But like what programs? And I guess my last point before we continue on, America does not have nearly as a robust welfare programs as some of the other Scandinavian countries. And if welfare is the causal factor for many of the ailments that plague, quote unquote, Black culture, we would also see these things. We would also see these things across the sea, and we just don't. So I don't really even think you can blame it necessarily on government intervention. It just seems that it's an easy punching bag or an easy straw man to burn, when we want to start sneaking in these things regarding public policy. So I'll go ahead and
I got one more quick comment.
Okay.
And this is sort of just an analogy or sort of an example. So because it's again the premise of Larry Elder is that if we do better, the results will be better. That's the premise. It's like, hey, Black people have a lot of bad habits or a lot of bad cultural practices, and these poor cultural practices are contributing to the disparaging numbers that exist. Do you know that currently one of the most highest educated demographics is African American women?
Yep.
Were you aware of that? So it's like if you go back and look at like the U.S. Census data and you look at the education, what you're going to find out is that per person, they're one of the highest groups of educated people. Do you know they're also one of the lowest paid? That you can go look to go look at the statistics, and you'll see that they on average make less than Black men without the equal education. On average, they make less. How does a phenomenon like this happen? I think there's a bunch of factors. One factor is this: I have a friend, and her daughter graduated with her bachelor's degree, and her daughter was struggling to find a job. Why? Because she's never been taught how to network. She doesn't understand it. That's just not a skill set she was ever taught, because that's a skill set that often is absent in the Black community due to our history. So she's got that one challenge strike that's against her. So her mom asked me to kind of do some mentoring with her to try to help her to get launched off into life after she graduated with her bachelor's degree. So I'm talking to her and I'm trying to get an idea of what field that she wants to go in based on her degree. And I'm kind of pointing out, well, here's some field that might not be with your degree, but it's an easy field to get into. You can make some money and you kind of figure things out from there once you got some money coming in. And so I'm talking to her about income. And so she's like, well, I just want to make $20 an hour. I'm like, well, sweetheart, that's like $42 a year, $42,000 a year. That's nothing. With your degree, if you look at your statistics, you're probably supposed to come out the gate making about $55,000 a year. That's if you're in the actual industry that you got your degree in. If you get, and she has no clue how much money that she should be asking for. So she goes into a company and she interviews, and let's just say they like her when she interviews her. And if she doesn't know how to negotiate a starting rate, which is what you do in a professional setting, there is no minimum wage. You go in and you negotiate your starting rate. She's likely to start off at the bottom. They're likely to give her a lowball offer. It's more money than she ever perceived at this moment because, you know, she doesn't have a lot of life experience. She starts off at the bottom of the scale. And if she stays with this company for 5 or 10 years, she's always behind her peers, because her peers came in with these life skills. They knew how to negotiate a salary. They're all $10, $15, $20,000 ahead of her 10 years later into their career. You don't recognize how all of these factors can play into outcomes that can produce where one of the highest educated demographics in the entire country can somehow be at the low end of the totem pole when it comes to average income. But that's a reality. And that's a reality that's largely in place because of the history of our people and because of the lack of social skills that we were able to develop over time when we were locked out of the system 50 years ago. And since we've been allowed to get into the system, it's been slow progress until today, to where things may appear on the surface to be relatively equal. But how can they be equal? You know, so yeah, I think that Larry Elder's assumption that our simply by altering our behavior, it's going to resolve the problem. I just don't think that that's the case. I think the problem is complex and way too complex and way too big, because due to the fact that it's impacted our entire population, generally speaking, and not just a few individuals within our population for this problem to shake itself out. I think that it were external entities that contributed to this deficiency that exists within this community of people, the entities that still exist today, and entities that in a world of justice bear responsibility to help mitigate and resolve these problems. So yeah, go ahead.
Hey, well said. I think you're muted. Okay.
Man in that demo was 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man in the same demo. Young black man, real young, 19 and under, the number one cause of preventable death is homicide, almost always at the hands of another young black male. Same demo for whites, the number one cause of preventable death is unintentional deaths. That includes drug overdoses, automobile accidents, drownings. It's not until they get to number 4 that death is the cause. In America, 60% of the shootings, the robberies, and the homicides are committed by black people, often against other black people. Of the homicides in this country, half of them are black victims, almost all killed by other blacks. How do you explain that if it isn't for the absence of fathers? Are you prepared to say black people are just genetically inclined to commit more crime? I doubt it. And the go-to reaction often is poverty and systemic racism. Here's the problem. 1940, when there was blatant racism, this is before Brown versus Board of Education, before the Civil Rights Act of 64, KKK was still alive and well, 87% of blacks lived under the poverty line. Now it's about 14%. You can't blame it on poverty. You can't blame it on racism. It is the breakdown of the nuclear intact family, and neither side is talking about it. The left doesn't talk about it because they caused it with the welfare state, and our side does not talk about it because if you're white, you'll be accused of dissing single moms who are heroically raising these kids, or you'll be accused of being a racist, or if you're black, you'll be accused, as I was by the LA Times, of being the black face of white supremacy. Nobody's talking.
This dude right here, bro. Golly, man. Yeah, so here's the funny thing about it, right? Now, remember what I said earlier about explanations. You know, I'm sorry I just jumped in, fellas, but this irks my nerves so bad. So remember I was talking about explanations, right? What is the explanation as to why African Americans are where they are? Or you can ask that question about other groups, you know, as well, right? Now, this man cites a stat. It says that in 1945, 87% of African Americans were under the poverty line, right? So in 1940, if you don't see the decline of the black family till later, you know, like in your 60s and 70s, then wouldn't that suggest to you that the genesis of African American poverty and associated, you know, ills in the African American community could not have been the decline of the black family? because poverty certainly predated the decline of the black family, right? I mean, just really think about the timeline. You know, the question we can ask is, if you believe that the resolution to black poverty and the social ills within the black community is the black family, and then you appeal to a time period where the black family is intact, yet at that time 87% of us were below the poverty line, it seems to me that that undermines your argument, right? Like, what was going on at the time back in 1945? We was broke and the black family was intact, right? So how is the black family the cause? Now again, that's not to say that there's no causal relationship between the decline of the family and social ills. I'm not saying that at all. This just goes back to my point about explanations. It can't possibly be the primary and only explanation as to why things are the way that they are. It can't be the case, right? Now, let me just throw this in. Again, I think that, I'll just go back to this word cause. I think that when you think about poverty, when you think about, the family structure, unfortunately, what you have is people treating it as if there's some sort of like one-way causal relationship. Like either poverty causes instability within the family, or instability within the family causes poverty. And I think it's the absence of the both and there that is super problematic. The reality is, it's possible for something to be both a cause and an effect. That's very possible, right? And I think what happens when you have this kind of binary mode, when you treat them as if it's either poverty is a cause or it's an effect, either the problems in the family are a cause or they're an effect, then in either case, you end up missing the big picture. And I think that's really what Larry Elder does. So to me, let me just say this, and I don't want to like bogart the conversation, but when you think about back in 1945, right, 87% of African Americans were below the poverty line. I think in a second he'll say something about maybe a decade or two later they reduced that to like 47%, something like that, right? Now, my question would be: did the economic state of African Americans in 1945 have any bearing on the economic state and conditions later on down the road? I think any rational person would have to say at least probably so, right? Because if you're beneath the poverty line, you probably don't have a lot of wealth lingered around to like put in a business. Like, you probably don't have a lot of equity in your home. You probably don't have a lot of resources, laying around that you can then, repurpose and utilize for your posterity down the road to do a lot better. Most likely, I think a rational person would say that you're in a disadvantaged state if you're below the poverty line. So the thing of it is, what we would expect to see for a group of people, 87% of whom are below the poverty line, we would expect to see in the decades to come that they probably won't fare all that well. So it's not surprising to me that, a couple of decades later, according to him, we're still 47% below the poverty. That's nearly half of black folks, according to him, are below the poverty line a couple of decades later. Like, that's the kind of thing that I think we would expect to see if you have people getting off to on a bad foot, if you will, economically speaking. So we could even add in, thinking about like going back to, I'll say your late 60s, early to mid 70s, the factories, in urban centers moving away into suburban areas or rural areas. So at the same time that he wants to pin everything on Lyndon Baines Johnson, in the decade to come, you have these black men who've been, working at the factory, jobless now, not having the ability to get out to the suburban areas, rural areas where these factories are, and so now they have nowhere to work, right? I think joblessness, and we can talk about fatherlessness. It seems to me that joblessness holds some place as an explanation as to why African Americans are where they are. Specifically, I'm referencing, the defactorization, if you will, of urban centers. All of these things has to come into play. That, again, that's not to negate the fact that I do think that fatherlessness is a major issue. I'm not saying that it's not. Certainly, it has had an impact. But even under his own analysis, even if you just look at his own timeline, it can't possibly be true that the whole story or the whole solution for everything has to condense down to restoring the home. That can't possibly be the case, right? I'll just kind of camp out there.
You want to go, Matthew?
Yeah. I mean, to piggybacking on what Adam said, I mean, you had a lot going on. A lot of people like Jason Riley. He is a black libertarian fella, and I think he wrote the book. Please stop helping us. All right, he's really attacking white liberals, and he talks about how basically black people did really good between the early 1950s and the 70s. Well, I mean, it's a documented fact that the economy was much different. Now we were still catching hell on quite a few fronts, but the economy was different. And the economy being different, just for a few things, I think James Galbraith, he made the observation that what was unique about the 1950s and 60s was that the government policies, social as well as economic, had something to do with the gains experienced by like all families, right? And so, what changed? Well, in the 1970s, not only do you have, the factories and stuff moving out, but you just had a whole process of deindustrialization. The economy was changing. No longer did you have federal wage price guidelines or anything like that, but the economy was changing. Macroeconomic policy was starting to take shape and take hold. You had Reagan, and you had Nixon. These things do matter, and like Adam said, yeah, you try to make the best of a bad situation, and you are responsible for your character. We wholeheartedly agree with that. But I think that the Christian worldview does allow for us to also point out and make structural critiques. It does. I'm gonna look up a scripture real quick.
Can I say something while you're looking at
Go
it?
ahead.
Because you hit on something that I wanted to touch on, and I'm sorry for jumping in, Chris. I'm not going to be long-winded, or at least I hope not anyway. But I think that right there, I want to touch on that because I feel like it gets at the heart of the contention between, say, like Charlemagne the God, and I can't remember the sister's name. I just can't remember it. But the sister was on the show, and Larry Elder. I think that when you would say at issue, I think is this contention between a notion of systemic responsibility, or I might just refer to as corporate responsibility, in terms of who's accountable for outcomes in society, or individual responsibility, right? I think that what happens is, at least in this context, that contention between what's should be center stage, individual responsibility or corporate responsibility, is overlaid with this racial piece of, well, who's responsible, white people in regard to the systemic responsibility, or black people in regard to individual responsibility. Somebody like Larry Elder would want to major on the case that individual responsibility and black folk is really, what black folks are doing should be center stage in terms of how we talk about explanations and causes for where black people are. Whereas Charlemagne, I think he even said it in his interview, that he believes that white people and white supremacy by means of the system is really, what should be center stage in terms of understanding why black people are where they are. I disagree with both of those perspectives. I disagree with both of them if you're heavy-handed either way. You know what I'm saying? I think that the biblical worldview spells out both certainly individual responsibility, but it also gives an account for how it is that we are responsible for the impact of our behaviors, dispositions, and so forth on other people. So when you think about, just kind of keep it very simple, Jesus says that it's better for you that you have a millstone tied around your neck and be cast into the sea if you offend one of these little ones, right? How you impact other people matters to God. Jesus says to the Pharisees that, you shut the door and people going in the kingdom, trying to get in the kingdom, and you're not getting in either, right? They're accountable for them not going in, and they have some responsibility for the people that they are keeping from the kingdom, right? So when we do something that affects somebody else, God cares about that. Now, here's the thing. and I probably can think of others, but there's at least two things that do not absolve you from responsibility for how you impact other people. Number one, Larry Elder seems to think that if black people have made progress, then it's all well and good. Well, from 1947 to 19 da 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 da, black, or whatever years he named out, a couple of decades where black people reduced, that level of being under the poverty line, like somehow like, all right, everything's cool. No, it's still not cool. Like you're still responsible for what you did, even if other people thrive in the face of it. That doesn't absolve you of moral guilt, the moral culpability. Secondly, if people have the ability to do otherwise, so for example, in the two scriptural cases that I gave, Jesus says, if you offend these little ones, it could be the case that one of those little ones was offended and still pursued the kingdom. That's possible. Or it could be the case that one of the people that's being shut out by the Pharisees from the kingdom, independent of what the Pharisees doing, seeks after the true God and makes it in. There's a possibility for them to do otherwise than be offended or to be cast out from the kingdom. But that doesn't absolve the Pharisees for what they did to negatively impact these folks. And so it could be the case, that maybe that African-American, young lady chooses not to have that man in the home, because, fatherlessness is being incentivized. Or maybe there were some systemic oppression that influenced somebody in a way that they end up getting on drugs and doing wrong by their family. In that case, like both the system and the individual bear some responsibility. It's not an either or. And I think that what we have to do is a better job of keeping track of the full scope of moral responsibility and not just try to do this blame game thing where either it's the white man or it's black folks, or, let's just blame the other. Well, listen, everybody's got to take account for what they do, and I think that if I can just be explicit, it just seems to me that for the benefit of this platform, Larry Elder is just dead set on keeping responsibility squarely on the shoulders of black people, and I think that that's a mistake, not only because, I'll just say it's a mistake or it's ignorant, because you can't possibly give an account as to why the African-American community is if you only had this pigeonhole view of responsibility. You need the full biblical counsel of what accountability looks like in order to understand what's going on in real time. And I think that that's what he's lacking.
Amen. I dropped a verse in the back chat. This just came to mind while you were talking. That said, here's I got two points on this clip here. The first is he just I don't know if you remember back in the early 2000s, there was this hip hop artist named Larry Lair. And he had this song called Confused. And it was a woman singing the hook. She goes, "Lately I've been so confused. Larry, tell me what to do." And I feel like Larry been drinking that Kool-Aid, listening to this hook, and he wants to tell us all, he got all the answers, right?
Right.
Larry Lair, look it up. Anyway, he was just right off the, people want to claim that it's poverty, and he's just dismissive. It's definitely the family. I'm like, have you surveyed the studies from around the globe, from different countries and societies, who are all finding the same conclusion that there is a correlation between poverty and mental health? There's a correlation between poverty and prison. There's a correlation between poverty and basically every negative statistical attribute that you could think of related to humankind. And I'm like, it's not just one society. You can't just say, when sociologists in America, you can try to just label it liberal. You can just say that's just the liberals caking, right? They're trying to come up with an answer, come up with a solution to the problem, but they're driven by their agenda. That's what they'll do. They'll just label it and dismiss it. These are studies from around the globe. It's not even that hard. You can literally Google correlation between poverty and ... and you'll come up with a 5-10 pages of PDFs of academic studies and their results. And it's like, how can you just dismiss that off the cuff? It's not that. It's the family. It's the family. It's the lack of the father in the household, let alone all of the issues with that we've already discussed today. Secondly, and I would even say secondly and more importantly. So he throws out these stats about African Americans in poverty in the 60s versus today, right? Let me ask either one of y'all. Did either one of y'all know what the standard for poverty is today? Off the cuff. This for a single person, you are in poverty if you make less than $13,888 a year. You're in poverty. $13,888 gross income. You are in poverty. I did a study a few years back when I had this debate with my buddy about income, income and justice, biblical standards of income, right? And in this, I pointed out, I did some research and I found out that the cheapest place, this was 4 or 5 years ago, this was before COVID, cheapest place to live in the entire country was Toledo, Ohio. At the time, for a 2-bedroom apartment in Toledo, Ohio, it was $550 a month. That's 5 years ago. That's before all this hyperinflation hit that just hit, back during the time of COVID, right? So think about that, $550 a month. Okay, I'm gonna put it at 500 just to make the math real easy. That's $6,000 a year. So if you have a gross income of $13,888 and you living by yourself, and the cheapest place that you can find to live in this cold country is $550 a month or $500 a month, $6,000 a year. That's literally half of your gross income. Half. And last time I checked, they taking FICA, Medicaid, Medicare. They taking all of federal taxes, state taxes, in many cases, city taxes. All of this is coming out of your check front loaded, right? Before you get your check. So even if it's nominal, because you're making these impoverished rate wages, it's like, who can live off of that? For a family of 4 in this country, poverty is $24,600 for a family of 4. A family of 4. So when he's talking about African Americans ascending out of poverty at a higher rate, the poverty levels, the standard for poverty is such a joke. To say that somebody's not in poverty means virtually nothing. It just puts them in this nebulous category of not being dirt broke. That's all it means. It don't mean that you ain't dirt broke. You can still be dirt broke, but according to the standard, you're not in poverty. A better way to look at it is to look at the U.S. Census data and look at actually income demographics. And on the raw percentage data is that African Americans make 60% of our majority culture counterparts. We make 60% on average. And again, they'll say, this is your fault. This is education. And we'll say we got the worst education centers in the entire country and where we live. I mean, there's all these mitigating factors that they just want to wholesale dismiss and place all of the blame on the people who have historically been the victims. Again, this is not to say that people today don't bear culpability for some of the decisions that they make, but it's unrealistic to expect them to be superhuman and to overcome all of these factors that has been compiled over generations, that have developed the culture that speak. Like if my granny experienced racism, do you think that she's not going to counsel me to be cautious and careful? Now, if the times are changing, but Granny is still carrying the PTSD from living in a time when it wasn't, how do you factor something like that in? The fact that my granny is warning me about the police. How do you factor that in? You can't dismiss her experience. She lived that experience. And if you weren't there, if your ancestors weren't there, standing up and trying to prevent that type of thing, how can you just, wholesale dismiss the fact that these type of dynamics exist and are contributing factor to the results that exist today? So yeah, it really burns me, particularly because of his age and particularly because of his origins. He's from the South. He literally lists where his parents are from. His parents are from the South. He's old enough to have experienced these things for himself and to have some sense of recognition. And yes, I imagine that, due to his career, that he's probably ascended to upper middle class status, at some point in his life, and he's been there. But like, you can't simply superimpose your experience on everybody else's. Everybody's experience is a little bit different, my man.
Well, so here's the thing, man, and I agree with everything you said. And it's like this, Chris. Let's say that you have $45. Let's say you have $50, right? Adam Coleman comes along, and I steal $45, right? And I can say, well, hey, if you just invested that $5 you had left into XYZ, stock account over here, stock, this part of the stock market, you could have made what I stole from you and more by investing at $5. Now, here's the thing. That might be true, but I still stole $45. You know what I'm saying? Like, that doesn't, the fact that you could do differently and in some sense, overcome what I did to you doesn't negate the fact that I did something to you, that I stole $45. And so you see it throughout the, Larry Elder's commentary. He even says, like, with the Tulsa massacre, he said something like, yeah, they rebuilt it all in 5 years, but they shouldn't have had to rebuild it in the first place. That's the point. That's the point. And so my point is, when it comes to, again, moral responsibility, absolutely, individual responsibility matters. Like, let's say, for example, if you were in a home that was in a neighborhood that was red line and you should have had $30,000 in equity, but now you only got 5 because you're some unjust economic practices, and you get mad about it, get on, alcohol, disregard your kids, and don't do what you're supposed to do, I'm still holding you responsible. Shame on you for that. Shame on you for that. And shame on the systems that enacted those things. There's shame on both. Shame on both. But I think that, when it comes to Larry Elder, he's only interested in addressing one side of the coin when it comes to responsibility. And that's just not biblical. I'm saying it's not true that because somebody could have done otherwise to maybe overcome what you did. Or he gives the example of his father who worked his way up from cleaning toilets or something like that, had the restaurant business. God bless him. Good for him. That's fantastic. But the reality is, for whomever didn't make that move, systemic injustice is still systemic injustice, no matter how many people do or don't overcome it. I'm saying right is right, and wrong is wrong. It's just really that simple. Go ahead, Matt. I see you over there churning.
Yeah, I mean, a lot. I'm seeing things in the comment sections too, but a lot of what you guys saying. I mean, when you think along, and this is what we're trying to get Christians not to do, which is to think in a partisan fashion. I think if Pastor Brandon was on here with us, he would say that we have to approach this from a place of a biblical ethic, a robust biblical ethic. And that's what we're trying to do in approaching this conversation. And so the system is not fair. The system isn't just. Now, is unjust, excuse me. And I say that, and a lot of my friends of a different hue will probably take issue with that. But the truth of the matter is, when your identity is rooted all the way in Christ, you're not going to get tied to these other sub-identities and make them the whole of your person. Or the ability to prophetically speak. And this is what it means to speak prophetically, to give a prophetic critique. I think that's what Martin Luther King, Adam just did a whole piece on Martin Luther King. I think Martin Luther King talked about the church being America's prophetic voice. But this is what it means to speak prophetically. I think the Bible also says that this is also what it means to know me, which is to do justice and to love justice. But the passage of scripture that I was looking for, and I want y'all to let me know if you catch this, but look at what's happening in Ezekiel. In Ezekiel 34:16-24. He says, I will bind up the injured and strengthen the weak, but the sleek and the strong I will destroy. I will shepherd the flock with justice. I will judge between one sheep and another, and between rams and goats. And here it is. Is it not enough for you to feed on the good pasture? Must you also trample the rest of your pasture with your feet? Is it not enough for you to drink clean water? Must you also muddy the rest with your feet? Must my flock feed on what you have trampled and drink what you have muddied with your feet? See, I myself will judge between the fat sheep and the lean, because you shove with the flank and the shoulder, butting all the way weak sheep with your horns until you have driven them away. I will save my flock, and they will no longer be plundered. I will judge between one sheep and another. I will place over them one shepherd, my servant David, and he will tend them. He will tend tend them and be their shepherd. I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David will be prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken. So all through there, you see God judging individuals for their actions. When he's talking about judging the sheep and the rams, separating the rams and the goats, and God is also judging for structural injustices having to do with the basic necessities of life, for having to do with plenty alongside of poverty. God is also judging that. He takes those things quite seriously. So this is a both and conversation. It's not an either or. You only think that it's an either or conversation if you're hell bent on thinking in a partisan fashion. And as Christians, we just can't do it. And I think it's Dr. Tony Evans. He says that God does not ride the backs of elephants and donkeys.
Come on, bro. Come on, bro. And here's the thing, man. And I say this. Let me clarify first of all. When it comes to, and this might be give me some trouble. I recognize that. When it comes to the Democratic Party, I really don't have no love for them. I'm be real with you. I'm not a fan. When it comes to the Republican Party, not a fan. Don't got love for it. That's it is what it is. Like, trust me, if you want to go in on how much I believe the Democratic Party has handicapped, I'll take you back to Dr. King. I'll take you back to Malcolm X, who been had critiques. I'm saying I'm thinking about like the Fox and the Wolf, for example. With Malcolm X, we could talk that talk. Trust me, I'll ride with you. You know what I'm saying? I got mad criticism. That being said, as much as I have, I feel very strongly about, the abortion issue. I promise you, if you look at all my material, there's very few things that you'll find me speaking as strongly about as I do when it comes to being pro-life. I feel very strongly about that. That being said, Larry Elder ain't it, y'all. You know what I'm saying? Larry Elder ain't it, man. You know what I'm saying? Candace Owens ain't it. I'm sorry. I say this with all due respect. This is complete conjecture on my part. Please don't charge what I'm about to say. To MJ and Chris. This is Adam talking. Man, I really believe that Larry Elder is a grifter. I really believe that it's so easy for any of us for our thinking to be clouded when money is involved. This man has a life and a platform that is entirely, it seems, as far as I can tell, maybe not entirely, but it seems to be mostly grounded upon the kind of stuff that he spews out. This is there's a bag, man. You know what I mean? We can't act like it isn't. And to me, this goes back to your point, Chris. I genuinely don't know if he knows better, but I think it could be the case that he doesn't know better because there's a lot at stake for him articulating a more balanced position. You know what I'm saying? I really believe that. And I'm not trying to disrespect the guy, but I just think that's what we're dealing with, man. And we just got to call a spade, man. There's a lot of talking heads out here that are making a lot of cash, you know what I'm saying, at articulating the views that they do. And there's Larry Elders on the progressive side. Don't get it twisted. There's money, there's grifters over there too. Mm-hmm. But this is why I keep coming back to it. This is why we need a biblical black voice in the public square. That's what we need. We can't ride with these cats, man. They're killing us right now, man. It's not cool, bro.
Look, I first of all, every time I condemn the Republican and the Democratic Party, people think I'm lying. They think I'm just saying that to save face, and I really support one of the parties. And it's like, no, man, I'm serious, man. I'm serious as Clayton Bigsby pulling his hood off, man. I mean it. I mean this. Y'all want to see my face? For real. That's it. That's it. For me, it's like Christians don't get, like, the whole Bible is a socio-political critique. Like, you ever wonder why it's always talking about emperors and kings and dictators, Old Testament and New Testament? It's always some king being critiqued. And who's being juxtaposed to that king? In the Old Testament is Yahweh. Go read the Psalms. Yahweh is king. That's the great declaration of Israel. Right. And what they're saying is, and Yahweh has a law, go figure. He has a kingdom, a society, a whole group of people. He got a land. It's right in front of you. It's politics. It's political. You get to the New Testament. Jesus is king. What was Jesus crucified for? Go read the Gospel of John.
Come on,
It's
bro.
real clear.
Very clear.
This is the King of the Jews. That's what they put. That's what they put up there. Oh, this your king. They put a robe on him. They put a crown on him. It's clear as day. Go to Acts 17. Paul gets drugged into court, and I think Ephesus, because he is preaching that there's another king instead of Caesar. That's the good news message, the gospel message that Paul is going around the kingdom preaching. And this good news king, Jesus, Yahweh in the Old Testament brought a kingdom of life. What is how do the gospels open? The kingdom of God is at hand. That's what John the Baptist is preaching. That's what Jesus is preaching. When John the Baptist preached it, and they asked, well, what should we do? You who have 2 cloaks, give to him who have none. Sounds familiar? Sound like you who have food, share with those who have none. That's what John says in Luke chapter 3. What should I do? I'm a tax collector. Don't collect more taxes than you're supposed to collect. Be content with your wages. What am I supposed to do? I'm a policeman. I'm a soldier. Don't bear false witness. Be content with your wages. Do justice. It's a kingdom. It's right there in front of you. And for us Christians, the solution is already here. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't participate in the American political system. I vote, but
Sure.
I don't vote with the sense that this vote that I'm casting, just true justice for our society, rests on this. I don't vote with the sense that the only hope that exists for our society is for some political paradigm to prevail in for our society in order to have it. Because for me, Jesus is king. For me,
right.
I'm a citizen of another kingdom. I got dual citizenship. And if I got to get one of them kingdoms up, I know which one I'm going to give up.
That's right.
I know which one I ain't giving up. I ain't giving up the kingdom of God. So yeah, so for me, it's part of the problem when Christians are talking about politics is we miss the reality that the Bible, in a sense, is a socio-political critique. The Bible is espousing that there's a political figure that we can go to that's going to produce a life of righteousness, whose rule saves us, literally rescues us. So yeah, I don't have to feel like Larry Elder. Yes, fatherhood is a problem. Yes, in my opinion, racism still today is a problem. Yes, today there's economic there's economic disparities that exist in light of prejudices in this country, and there's a whole host of other problems. And we as Christians are called to do justice. Amos, right? So we should
right.
be interacting and participating in these political systems.
Right.
We give up this hope in it, though. We got to give up this notion that the only way that things are going to be fixed and be right is if these political paradigms prevail. We got to get it up. We got the solution. It's in Jesus. And then the practical solution is in us. It's in the church. If the church simply lives out the good news commands that Yahweh and Jesus have given us, we'll solve a lot of these problems. We don't have to complain about welfare abuse in the government if we're producing welfare. If we're feeding, if we're who have 2 cloaks given to him who have none. If we who have food share with them who have none. If all the Christians just start practicing the things that Yahweh and Jesus preach.
You know what? Can I say something on that, Chris? I feel like so that right there. See, you know, MJ was talking about speaking prophetically, right? And I think that you know, to your point, adds in another piece where, and I don't want to do any violence to the text, but it's some, I guess I'll just use the term like living prophetically. You know what I mean? Like you're speaking into the culture with your life, right? The church is the church, capital C, regardless of what goes on in the government. You know, Democrat, Republican, Vivisec, whatever that new guy. I don't know. I can't pronounce his name. You know what I mean? Whatever, who's doing whatever. You know what I'm saying? Those principles are in place, right? We ought to be the ones bearing, you know, mercy to whatever context that we're in. That's what we should be doing. We don't have to wait for a policy to do that. And I think part of the problem is exactly what you said, is that it's like, you know, it says in the song, we're trusting in princes. It talks about do not trust in princes. That's what we're doing. It's like we're abdicating the role that the church should play in society to the government. And we're sitting back waiting for them to do what we're supposed to be doing. I don't care who gets in the office, you know, in the next come around. Our assignment doesn't change. It doesn't change. So I think that's a big part of the problem. Well, I just camp out there. I know we got some more of the video.
No, we got. But I think we should jump ahead to that 11-minute mark. Where
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah,
let's jump ahead to that, and then that'll be the last clip for today, and then we can give some closing comments on that because we're approaching 2
I did
hours.
want to talk about that. There's some questions that Charlamagne asked. That I thought was very insightful. But yeah,
Let's jump on that 11, and then you can get into
I
those
want that
questions.
Citibank clip too.
All right,
let's
yeah,
do it. No, yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's go.
I'm good. It's whatever. Yeah.
All
All
right,
right,
so
I'm about to. I'll be back in 1 minute. I'm about to go refresh.
Okay. All right, give me just 1 second, Adam.
No, you good? Yeah, man. But yeah, while you're doing that, I think that's the problem, man. Is that we the church is playing the caboose in so many of these conversations, when really we need to be the engine driving it. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't need conservatives and progressives giving us the categories with which we discuss what's going on in society. We need to be going to the Bible for that. And I'm just okay. You about to play it right here? Okay.
All right, I am pulling it up. All right, and here we go.
So it's historic racism. There was a civil war. There was a big civil rights movement. This is the only majority white country that's ever elected a black president, let alone re-elected a black president. The 3 biggest cities in America are New York, Chicago, LA. They all have black mayors, even though no city has a majority of black population. The president of Harvard is a black female. Martin Luther King in 1966, Charlamagne, gave an interview to the BBC. This is 2 years after the Civil Rights Act of 64 got passed. And he said, "I'm amazed at how many positive changes there have been in America in the last 2 years. Why, if things keep going like this, we could have a black president in about 40 years' time." Mm-hmm. Do the math. Right on cue, Barack Obama, elected 2008. He didn't say there'll be a black female president of Harvard, and there has been. He didn't say there are going to be black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and there have been several. He didn't say the percentage of the House would equal the percentage of black people in the population, and it does. He didn't say the 3 largest cities would have black mayors, and they do. He didn't say the largest and most prestigious organization of doctors, the American Medical Association, would have 2 black presidents, and there have been. He didn't say the most prestigious organization of lawyers, the American Bar Association, would have 2 black presidents, and they have. He said president, meaning at that point, I can feel that I've reached the mountaintop, which is the speech he gave right before he got assassinated the day before. And now we act as if Barack Obama never even got elected. And we're still talking about systemic racism. It's not fair. It's wrong. And you're discouraging black people from working hard. 1996.
Okay. Oh, Jesus.
Man. Well, yeah, so let me say this. And here's where maybe I could have. I'm always looking for common ground, and I'm not just saying it, but one thing I do think is as maybe even more problematic, in terms of a narrative, is where people feel the need to just disregard all the progress that has been made in America. You know what I'm saying? It is absolutely true that there's been a great deal of progress in this country. Obviously, I'm sitting here talking to you on a computer, while I got my AC blowing and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not trying to be flippant, but, we're not picking cotton right now. You know what I'm saying? That, obviously there's been some change. And I don't think that we can minimize that. As a matter of fact, I said this in my interview last week on Unbelievable. I think we actually do a disservice to our forefathers and foremothers when we don't appreciate the progress that's been made, because they bled, sweat, and died for there to be change, and there has been change. And so I think we have to honor that. We have to respect that. That being said, there's a both and here. Then it is true that there's been some progress, and we still have a ways to go. When Dr. King, in 1960, whatever he said, imagine, I guess it must have been 1968. Imagine that there would have been, if we get a black president, then maybe we would have reached a mountaintop. From where he sat at that time, that probably made a lot of sense. I can imagine somebody. I'll just look at my parents, for example. I remember when Barack Obama was elected, they thought that it would never happen. So I can imagine somebody like Dr. King in 1968 thinking that, hey, by the time we get a black president, then, we'll be in a situation where, we've reached that mountaintop. That being said, Dr. King was mistaken. There's no way that he could have foreseen exactly, where we would be right now. He probably maybe didn't consider, I'll just say maybe didn't consider things like Wells Fargo, being, brought up for redlining like 2 years ago. And I think it was Bank of America, I want to say in Philly in 2017, I believe they had like a class action suit for redlining, which is clearly decades after, that was made illegal. illegal. Perhaps Dr. King wouldn't have foreseen something like that. When we think about there being unjust practices, I think it was in Kentucky with respect to jury selection and things of that nature. When we think about whether, regardless of what people believe about the Michael Brown narrative and the hands up, so on and so forth, it is the case that the Department of Justice found that there was systemic racism going on there in yeah, golly, I don't know why I'm missing the place. Ferguson, it is the case, regardless of the mayor and whomever else, black mayor, whoever else was in place in Baltimore, it is true that the Department of Justice found that there's some systemic injustice of a racial nature going on in Baltimore. These things are also true. So, when it comes to Barack Obama being elected, I think, of course, that was a huge event from a historical standpoint. But listen, there's still some things that are going on, and wherever that is the case, it needs to be addressed. It is much harder to find the level of systemic injustice that was going on in the '60s today. Like, obviously, that's not the case. It's much harder to discriminate than it used to be, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. On a systemic level, our society is made up of multiple systems, and wherever we find injustice of whatever sort, we ought to address it.
Yeah. One of the things that just kind of piggybacking off what you were just talking about, how Martin Luther King's projected kind of line of demarcation ultimately failed to be the standard, right? One of the things that we don't often consider is the growth of the American population. In 1960, there's like 180 million people here. There's twice that now. It's like 330 something million people here. So all while we're talking about these problems, and thinking what a solution might potentially look like, you're not factoring in that the U.S. population has for long time been growing. Like back, I think we were like 119 million people back during the Great Depression, 1920. So 1920 we're at 119 million people. 1960s we're at 180 million people. 2023 we're at 330 million people. It's almost doubled the population from the 1960s, and so a lot of these issues get kind of diluted, and the solutions get a little bit diluted because it's not necessarily like we know that the vast majority of these people in the population from the population growth are immigrants. These people don't necessarily have the history in mind when they're casting a vote. So I'll vote for a black person because I might have heard about racism and I think that's a bad thing. And so I'm here now, I'm a citizen, I get to cast a vote and I'm going to vote for it. So it doesn't necessarily carry the same weight that it would have carried at the time with the society that we had. So again, I'm just kind of pointing out how sometimes some of these things get lost in the reality that America is constantly growing and morphing and changing, and the population is not simply an indigenous population. It's an immigrant, largely an immigrant population, and implicit within an immigrant population is the lack of perception, the lack of understanding of the history, and how that impacts certain decisions that are made today.
Can I piggyback on that? First with a couple of things. Let me just clarify that I think when people think of systemic racism, they feel as that the case needs to be made for like the entire system being involved in some sort of like racial agenda and practice and so forth. When maybe it is helpful to clarify that systemic racism could happen not necessarily on like the macro level, meaning some sort of like congressional bill or something like that's being passed that's racist. You know what I mean? Like, or is harmful to one race or another. It can happen on a local level. It can happen on various different levels. Like somebody can leverage the system, whether it be on a county level, the city level, state, federal, on various different levels in the economic system. Like systemic racism can occur on different levels and in different regards. So I think that needs to be said. That being being the case, like what do you do with somebody like Amber Geiger, for example? When we see the Botham Jean case, I think she was a quit. I can't remember. That's a shame.
She was a police officer. She came home from a shift.
Right.
She went to the wrong floor of her apartment building and went into someone else's apartment. Yeah.
Correct. So we'll never know, why she went into the wrong apartment. We do know that somehow mysteriously, The person who testified against her, one of the main witnesses, was executed about a week after the trial. I think that's interesting. Aside from that, we do know that in her text messages, when they were going back and doing some due diligence to find out what was going on with that situation, they did discover that while she was at a Dr. King event, she joked about him getting a bullet in the head. We do know that she joked about and used the N-word in her text messages to other officers. We know that came out in the trial as well, right? So we do know when you think about the gentleman in North Carolina, who was another officer who stupidly had his body cam on when he was talking about having a racial war against the N-words and so on and so forth. He was a police officer. We know that there are officers on the force who are straight up racist. You know what I'm saying? How many? We don't know. But we do know that there are people who are in positions to leverage the system in ways that harm minorities. We know that to be the case. Okay. And so now you have this intersection between systemic racism and racism of like, in terms of like a racist disposition that an individual might have. There's an intersection between the two, right? And wherever that happens, and it's clearly it's still happening, we need to be active in doing something about it, right? It doesn't have to be some policy, some act coming out of the White House or some bill written in Congress for us to care about it in terms of there being some sort of systemic issue. Like it doesn't have to be all that, right? And I think that what happens is people like Larry Elder, they want to, I would say, just really muddy the waters of what really is at issue here by suggesting that, oh well, it's got to be something, like show me where there's systemic racism, as if you had to point to like a president or a bill or something like that to suggest that there is. I just want to put that.
I think that in addition to that, there's a difference between systemic and systematic racism. So you just described one type of systemic racism where the system can be a broken person within the system by virtue of being a part of the system can leverage a system and thus produce systemic issues, right? Well, you also have, like, back during the war on crime and the war on drugs and all of that era, 40 years, there were legislations that were put in place that regarding sentencing. So there might be, if you have this much cocaine, it triggers this standard sentence. Now,
Right.
if those legislations were never repealed, even if the people at the time who produced those legislations were racist, if they're out of office, they're gone, out of sight, out of mind, but the system is still broken because those laws are still on the books.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a person ends up in front of a judge and the judge is looking at the sentencing standards, the judge has guidelines that's supposed to influence how they sentence this person. So systemic racism also, I think, happens that way, where there may no longer be a racist person in office producing racist legislation, but there may be racist legislation that is still on the books that was produced from people with racist attitudes. And because that legislation is on the book and no one's thinking about this as racist, because the person today who's picking up the book and doling out the punishment, that person's not racist. That person is just like, hey, I'm just a judge trying to do my job. These are the guidelines, and they're doing the guidelines, and no one's considering the fact that the guidelines are prejudiced. The guidelines are implicitly carry the prejudice that was imposed upon them when they were originally put into place. So systemic racism exists in a variety of ways.
Right, and it's independent. It's not necessarily dependent on any given person. So that's
Exactly.
why you could have a locality with maybe a black mayor, black police chief, and black whatever else, and still have outcomes that bear the marks of systemic racism. That's how that can happen.
That's how that happens.
And let me be clear. I don't believe, again, just like I said, just like fatherlessness is not the entire story of why African Americans are where they are. I don't believe that racism is the entire story in terms of why African Americans are where they are. I think that there's a bunch of different factors. And what irks my nerves is when people act like it's just one or the other. We have to think more clearly than that. There's a lot going on here, folks. There's a lot going on here. There can be a both and. Two things can be true at once.
There, to both of your point, not agree with everything that you guys said. There's a whole discussion on systemic racism, structural racism, institutional racism. You have philosophers who will go into the subject. So you got, you can have de jure and de facto systemic racism, right? De jure systemic racism, right? Chris just talked about laws on the books that when you trace and you reverse engineer back far enough, they go back to certain laws and standards that were put in place, possibly by a person who was an individual racist. But also, I mean, look at the impact of redlining, right? Redlining property, the funds generated from properties, the funds generated from these properties also funding the school system. These are mechanisms that have other interlocking forms, other interlocking impacts on other structures within America that impact these other things and affect outcomes. And so the notion that we don't need to look at outcomes, well, I mean, we readily deny that. When the Asian group just got through, or Edward Bloom, white guy, found a bunch of Asian students for the lawsuit that he just took before the Supreme Court. They were looking at outcomes. They were looking at outcomes, and they looked at those outcomes, and what did they say? Systemic racism is affecting these Asian students. But they were able to do that based on looking at these outcomes. And so the notion that we don't need to look at outcomes, number one, you're trying to hijack the conversation, and you're being inconsistent at that. But to the other point that Adam made, I mean, we have made progress. We've made substantial progress, and we're not where we used to be.
Absolutely.
But I think Martin Luther King, and he gets misrepresented so much. I think his goal was for more than just basic access. In his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Right? And I was talking to a doctor at lunch. He was like, "Oh, I love Dr. Martin Luther King's sermons." I said, "Well, he wrote quite a few books," and he just looked at me shocked. He was more than just a speech giver. He was more than just a performer.
Come on,
right?
Man.
They love us when we perform, sing, and dance. But when we start dropping knowledge, then it makes some uneasy. But this is what he said, and you can kind of feel Dr. Martin Luther King also echoing what Malcolm X said about being stabbed in the back and then walking away from the blade, and the blade is still sticking out of a person's back. Yet it hasn't even been repaired. But this is what MLK says. On page 95, he says a society that has done something special against the Negro for hundreds of years must now do something special for him in order to equip him to compete on a just and equal basis. It's not just about access. It's about a little bit more than that.
He sound like Patrick Monahan.
Probably sound like Ibram Kendi.
But here's the thing, though. It's like everybody knows that, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, and here's what I mean by that. When you think about this, like how this country was founded, right? The idea, and I'm going to be overly simplistic now. The idea is that you'd be able to take your talents or resources to the market, gain a return from it, build wealth, and then convey that to your posterity on down the line. Like that's the idea, right? So when you prohibit a group of people from gaining wealth, I mean, you can expect that they're probably not going to do too well. Nobody's confused about that. And so that's why you can have the Homestead Act. That's why you can have government intervention when it comes to people moving out west and the government helping them to secure that land and then build on it and farm on it, so on and so forth. That's why you can have the GI Bill, which essentially created suburban America. But by the way, it wasn't really giving free access to African Americans. At the same time where redlining was having such a detrimental effect, and you had the development of the white middle class. These things are happening at the same time, right? It's not just about getting a job and earning a wage, man. I'm saying like what wealth, accruing wealth matters, and the way that this system has been set up. And when you inhibit people's ability to accrue wealth, then you can expect for there to be some real ill effects. I mean, that's just what it is. Like nobody should be confused about that. You know, I mean, I don't. It's just strange to me. And let me just say this, and I might get kicked off the show. I'm just gonna say it. But man, let me tell y'all something, man. Yo, I have nothing against any ethnicity. I genuinely don't. I'm saying I'm cool with everybody, but I mean, one of my pet peeves, and Elder he'll do it here in a minute. But when you cite Asians and like Haitians and all these other people as like a case study of how minorities have gotten ahead, and so it's like, bruh, I guess so. We've been, if you come at the tail end after we done marched and sat at diner counters and done all these things to secure freedoms, and you come through later on and ball out, God bless you. I'm happy for you. I ain't mad. But you can't trample on the people that just been here since the beginning doing the work to secure some of those freedoms. Like they're not independent of one another. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't use that as a case study against African Americans. Like come on, dog.
Like
it's crazy to me. The histories are not the same. We gotta stop doing that, man. We gotta stop doing that, bro.
So I'm writing a book review, right? And I'm writing a book review.
He's actually writing a book. That's another conversation.
Yeah, you know what it is. Yeah.
And the individual who I'm critiquing or reviewing cites Thomas Sowell several times. And as you're listening to Larry Elder is regurgitating Thomas Sowell hook, line, and sinker.
Of course. Yeah.
And what Thomas Sowell loves to do is to talk about immigrants. But what Thomas Sowell does not do, and I'll give you an example of a guy right now. He's running for president. He's the Indian gentleman, Vivek.
Oh my goodness, that dude drive me crazy.
He said that his parents came over here broke and worked their way up from the bottom to the top. First and foremost, they were of the highest caste.
I was just about to say that.
Okay.
I'm about to say that. He's lying. He's lying. He's
a lying wonder. He's a lion wonder.
All you gotta do is look at their names, and you know the names of the cast of the higher caste systems.
Breaking it down.
Okay, I even got some books on my shelf that critique Thomas Sowell. I can't grab them right now. But Thomas Sowell ignores any evidence that contradicts his thesis. He ignores any evidence. And so Vivek, for both of his parents had advanced degrees. We're talking PhDs and MDs. You are not at the bottom of the barrel. Furthermore,
he's not the Slumdog Millionaire, bro. That's not his story.
I think in this book right here, either in this book or another book, it talks about even how Asians come over here and they're not at the bottom of the barrel. They're roughly middle class with pretty good degrees. Also, another reason why Asian household income is even higher than white household income. It's not that individual Asians are living in the homes by themselves, but that income is a tally of all the individuals living in that household. Asians tend to have more people in the home than just the nuclear family, and they tend to work together. But secondly, the whole point is, the Asian countries don't send the bottom of the barrel over here. They send their best. And so to try to pit black people against immigrants, I mean,
it's really apples and oranges, and that's really what I'm trying to say. It's like, because he wants to say that, well, if America was racist, then you wouldn't have Asians and the people from the East, Indians or whatever, they wouldn't be balling over here. Now, I mean, I do think that if we're going to be refined, then the term, the phrase "America is racist," and I think that's super imprecise. So nobody should be saying that anyway. But that being said, my point is, these different groups have their own histories. They've got their own histories. Like there is not a one-to-one comparison. And so when it comes to the exposure, if you will, the protracted exposure to various forms of discrimination and oppression, they do not all have the same histories with respect to that exposure, with their group and exposure to those things. So you can't treat them the same. They're just not the same. I respect. Look, hats off to whoever from wherever you are. I don't care where you come from. If you out here balling, God bless you. That's cool. It's just apples and oranges. That's it. And we just treat the different histories as they are. That's fine. They're different histories.
Yeah. But I think that the one sad reality is that African American, the stigma that is associated with African Americans is associated with our skin color. And Asians don't carry our skin color, and just like many other immigrants, like back during colonization period, early immigrants were from Great Britain, right? And then you get
Right.
Irish immigrants, French immigrants. You get immigrants, and they were racist against each other back then.
They were right. Right.
You get the turn of the 20th century, and what you got going on over there in Nazi Germany, and this anti-Semitic, these anti-Semitic attitudes, which have been generated for hundreds of years at this point. Anti-Semitism had kind of been a theme as since the Reformation, and Christians and Christianity becoming a very prominent religion around the world. And an unfortunate side effect of that was, often there was anti-Semitism associated with it. These perspectives of the Jews who killed the Messiah, right?
Right.
And then now you got this turn of the century, and you got Nazi Germany, and anti-Semitism on the rise. Well, Americans, white Americans of other nationalities that came here would often change their last name and assimilate into American culture so that they can avoid racism. We can't do that. We just can't. We can't do that. I mean, you might today. If Candace Owens and Larry Elder is any, you might be able to do that to some degree today.
I mean, you got to work for it. You got to work.
Right, but you got to.
To your point, though. To your point, they didn't even have to do that as much. When you get to, I want to say it's around 1940 when you begin to see changes in the census, that where you had Eastern Europeans, like say, or Irish and Eastern Europeans counted differently than white, like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. You begin to see like the amalgamation of those groups where it was just white, right? And then in so much as they were able to, so it's almost like the census itself helped them to assimilate even more. So now you don't necessarily have to pretend as much. You've been co-opted. You've been into this class of what it means to be white, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just in time, for things like the GI Bill, for you to take advantage of things like that.
You get that 2% interest loan.
That's a beautiful thing.
Hot,
and I ain't mad.
Right.
I'm
only mad we couldn't get it. I ain't mad that y'all got it.
Go for it.
I'm mad that we couldn't get it. And I'm mad that when houses was costing $5,000 that are now worth $5 million in places like Los Angeles, our people were locked out of that.
Right.
Our people were disenfranchised and locked out of that. And so now other people groups who are passing down generational wealth through the great privilege of owning a home in America that was extended to the American citizens through this government, our people were disenfranchised and locked out of that. And it's like it's we're talking about, you go to the criminal justice system, you go to the education system. It's like thing after thing after thing that our ancestors were disenfranchised, and yet the results today is all our fault. It's all our fault.
Somehow,
we're just a bunch of idiots. And then it's all about individualism until it's about us. Then it's like, you guys are dumb, or you guys are lazy,
right.
Or you guys cause your own problems. But when it's us, it's like, well, I worked hard. My ancestors came over here poor. Yeah, I was at the top of the caste system over in India. Nobody's gonna look that up though. Over here, we came over here dirt poor. We were millionaires over there.
But that's the funny part. I think that's the insightful part about Charlemagne's question, where he said, well, do white people do anything wrong? And I think that it's insightful because if you really think about Larry Elder's line of argumentation, it really boils down to black people are a bunch of immoral, family bungling screw ups. That's really what it amounts to. If you guys would tighten up with respect to your character and the structure of the family, you'd be all right. Well, the implication would be is that there's these other people over here, these white folks. The reason why they're all right is because they adhere to these principles and family and so on and so forth. Now we can then ask the question: is it true that the whole story again, with respect to African Americans, it has to do with just systemic racism? No. Is it the case that where we are, why we are where we are has to do with exclusively individual character and responsibility? No. Is it true that when it comes to the white community, that the reason why they are where they are is entirely because of their moral fiber and sticking to the family? No, that's not true. It's not true. Is it true that where they are as a group is all because of racism? No, that's not true either. Right? Gosh, he just oversimplifies everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a slew of folks. Like, you talked about those homes who, that were such and such, and now they're worth $5 million. There's a lot of white people that benefited from that. It is what it is. I'm not mad. I'm genuinely not. If you were one of those people, God bless you. I ain't mad. I'm just saying, let's represent history accurately. That's all I'm saying. Let it be what it be.
And if you want to be righteous, then tell it like it is.
That's it.
Acknowledge the fact that the disenfranchisement of our ancestors have contributed to our status today. That's all we're asking for. We're asking, when they rounded up Asian people during World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. That was World War II, right? World War II, right? Okay, World War II. Yeah, when they rounded up Asian people and they put them in those concentration camps in the 80s under the administration of Ronald Reagan, there was an official apology for that to the people, survivors and ancestors of those who survived. And along with that official apology was a reparation of $20,000 to the individuals or the families of the individuals who survived that atrocity committed by the U.S. government. There's yet to be an apology. We didn't even get to the point of talking about reparations, repairing the damages done over the course of slavery and racism. An apology would be nice. It didn't make it through the Senate. It got through the Congress. And people like, we're passed in Congress. I'm like, well, the one for the Japanese people passed through Congress, the Senate, and the president signed off on it. And y'all telling me what our ancestors went through, it just getting it through Congress, we should be grateful. It's not official. It needs to get through the Senate, get to the president, and be signed off. And somehow, some way, it's just not that important. Maybe 100 years from now, when no one cares anymore, that someone will say, oh, we'll officially apologize. Because that's what they do. When Jack Johnson gone, dead and gone, in ancient history, then the president decides that he wants to posthumously pardon the man and clear his name. You know what I'm saying? That's how our country operates. That's not justice.
That's wild,
in the kingdom
of
God, that type of stuff don't happen. In the kingdom of God, Jesus is the just judge. That's how Jesus ain't that judge that you got to go to every day and pester to get some justice out of him. Jesus is the just judge that is swift to adjudicate and bring righteousness. Mm-hmm. But y'all still want to hang out with these politicians in America. These guys that lie to you, tell you they came from poverty when they came from the upper caste system.
Come on, bro.
Y'all got time for one more?
Yeah.
All right, last one, and we may take a couple of questions. All right. Adam feeling good, so I gotta try to get it in real quick. All right, here it is. Oh, make sure I share it.
You may say this, I'm just asking a question. You said a number of things. Can I just address one of them about loans? Mm-hmm. In 1965, Barack Obama, who's in private practice, joined a bunch of other lawyers to file a class action lawsuit against Citicorp, which is headquartered here in New York. 186 black people were. Citicorp said, no, it's not racism. You have poor credit scores, and we want to make sure we get our money back. Obama joined a bunch of other lawyers, and they sued Citicorp in a class action lawsuit. Corp said, okay, with it, give them all loans. And they followed them all up. Daily Caller did a few years later. Almost all of them lost their homes. Several of them filed for bankruptcy. One of them even said, when you don't qualify for a loan, maybe we shouldn't get a loan. Well, duh. It wasn't true that black people were not getting loans. Plus, there are all sorts of black-owned community banks around the country, and it turns out the turn-down rate when you applied for a loan at a community bank was even higher because they had less capital and they couldn't afford to loan money to risky people. It is just not the case that the reason for the plight of the black community is because people were not lending money to them. It's just not true. That's not true.
Did everybody get that? these people lost their homes, number one, because Barack Obama was working that case, and number two, well, we could reverse them. Number one, because their credit was bad. Number two, Barack Obama set them up. That's what Larry Elder would have us to believe. Just like when we engage in apologetics, when we hear some type of information, let's just check into it. We got the internet. Most of this stuff is documented. And I think Larry Elder called himself, it was actually like 1994. But I did a little bit of research, and there was indeed a class action lawsuit. And it wasn't necessarily involving 186 individuals. It was involving 3 black people, namely a woman by the last name of Bucks Roberson, right? So let me just read a little bit now. And I also drop this in the chat real quick. So let me drop it in the chat real quick. I also actually dropped the whole case summary in the chat too, because we like receipts. But this case did not involve black people alleging that banks were not loaning them money because because they didn't have good credit or anything like that. It was a good case, a clear-cut case of redlining. In other words, people living within a geographical area, not being allowed access to loans based on where they live. All right, it says the 1994 case of Bucks Robinsons versus Citibank Federal Savings Bank had nothing to do with requiring lenders to do business with people who could not show proof that they could pay the money back. The case was a class action lawsuit against Citibank Federal Savings, initiated by a Chicago woman, Selma Bucks Roberson, who claimed that she was unfairly denied a mortgage based on her rate. The lawsuit sought to end the practice of redlining. Once again, this is 1994, well after the civil rights movement. Also, Adam mentioned it earlier, not only Wells Fargo, but I think Bank of America, both of them just got nailed for redlining. It's still going on.
In the last 5-6 years, man.
Structural racism. I want to be more precise. Structural racism in America.
Right.
Let me say it again. Structural racism in America. Okay? Redlining in 1994. Redlining in recently 2 years. Redlining, a discriminatory practice by which banks, insurance companies, and other business institutions refuse or limit loans, mortgages, insurance based solely on the geographic area in which the applicants live. It's a practice that commonly excludes minorities in the inner city neighborhoods, regardless of their income. Let me say that again for the folks in the back, the MAGA folks. Regardless of their income or ability to pay. Specifically, the lawsuit charged that Citibank rejected loan applications of minority applicants while approving loan applications filed by white applicants with similar financial characteristics and credit history. The case was eventually settled out of court with some class members, those are the other folks, probably 186 of them, receiving cash payments, and Citibank agreeing to help ease the way for low and moderate income people to apply for mortgages. Okay? Barack Obama was a lawyer who played a small role. He didn't play a big role. He was just on the team. He was a young buck. He was just on the team. But Larry Elder is citing the Daily Caller, which is a partisan blog, for his evidence. And his evidence doesn't talk about that. But what his evidence does talk about is the fact that they allege that based on this case, based on the fact that the bank had to do business with some of those people, they were not able to pay back the loans, probably around 2007, 2008. Now, everybody on my panel, let me just ask Chris. Chris is the money man, and Adam is also a real estate agent. So both of you
Yeah,
brothers
I've
can
definitely got
hit.
the money. I ain't got no money, so yeah, you ain't got to.
It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming. Uh, but both of these brothers probably would know way more about this than I do. But what happened in 2007 and 2008 in the home market?
Oh, that's when the subprime loans that they have been doling out because of the so basically take a step back. So me and Adam were talking about the GI Bill loans, and GI Bill loans were one of the case studies that was shown that African Americans was disenfranchised. So the housing department created HUD, a sub housing department specifically to address African American or minorities who have been locked out of the system. So from that, they also changed some of the standards, I believe, for people to qualify for mortgages to, I guess, broaden the range of people who would actually qualify for it. With that came a long period where they were writing subprime adjustable rate loans for many Americans, predominantly these African Americans and other minorities. And then in 2007, 2008, there's a bubble bust as the a recession. I mean, when the economy is really good, in order to slow down people from buying and to slow down inflation, you have to raise interest rates, right? So they started these adjustable rate mortgages. The interest rates started to go up because it was a period where they were trying to kind of slow down inflation and prevent the economy from overheating. Well, these adjusted rate mortgages put the monthly mortgages out of the budgets of these people who were able to afford these mortgages when they were originally written and pay the mortgages up until the point where the absorbent payments were actually kicking in, or the absorbent monthly rates was actually kicking in. So there was a housing bubble bust, and a lot of banks ended up foreclosing on a bunch of houses because of these subprime loans that were written. So, is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
All right, there we go.
Yep. And so there's a term for this. This is called reverse redlining, right?
Yeah.
This is where basically what could be called professional loan sharks target the low income geographical areas, minorities, probably with not great okay credit to bad credit, with loans that they know that they probably won't be able to pay based on what the loan does, such as these balloon rates, these bubble payments, and all that good stuff. So
they set you up for failure. That's the short version of it. They set them up for failure.
It's a setup for failure, right? And so a person could be evaluated on credit worthiness. A person might not have credit worthiness because they don't have enough assets, right? Because they don't have enough credit history. It's not maybe they don't have so much bad credit, but maybe don't have enough credit history. But when you've been locked out of a system, right, and you have entities that refuse to loan you money or even insure your property, maybe just for even house repairs, it's hard to break through in those systems. But here comes lenders with ridiculous mortgage rates and interest rates on these loans that target you. And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And of course, Larry Elder doesn't mention all that because they were set up to fail. But Larry Elder is able to sit back and say, see, they didn't have good credit to begin with, and they were not able to pay. They were not able to pay the loan back.
So they were actually able to pay into the predatory, absurd caveats in these mortgages kicked in. That's when they couldn't afford to pay. If you'd have just given them a fixed interest rate, and here's the logic. I remember this. I vividly remember this because I bought my first house during this period back in the 90s. So
I'm flying Chris down here when it's time for me to get a house.
So here's what they would do back then. They would go, okay, the interest rate is 6.85% right now. And so you can get this fixed interest rate of 6.85%. At the fixed interest rate of 6.85%, you can afford a $1,300 a month mortgage payment, right? That's how much. That's how much you can get. That's how much. So you can get $130,000 house, and it's going to be a 30-year mortgage, 6.85. It's going to be $1,300 a month. Or we can give you a adjustable rate, which will start off at 3.2% interest, and therefore you can qualify for a $250,000 house instead of a $130,000 house. That's a much nice house with prettier bells and whistles and stuff, and it's going to be 3.5%. But at the 5-year mark or the 10-year mark, you're going to have a balloon payment that you're going to have to that's going to be due worth that's cost $10,000, and with that, your rate's going to adjust up to 9.8%. Something crazy, right? This. Oh, but don't worry about it, because all you got to do is just pay on the mortgage for 2 or 3 years and then just refinance it. Just pay on it for 2 or 3 years, and then your credit's going to be really good, and you just refinance the mortgage after 2 or 3 years. But people that's not used to all this, they just paid on the mortgages and they never refinanced it. They're not thinking about it. In their minds, the 3-point-something% got them this nice house. They happy, they paying on the mortgage, and they don't have actual, financial acumen or literacy to begin with. So by the time that 10-year period hit, or the housing market burst, or when they start raising the interest rates to cool the market, and you had that adjustable rate, and your rate went from that 3.5, shot right past that 6.8 that you could have had on that $130,000 house, and been content and have been happy to maintain that house, and shot all the way up to 10, 11, 12, 13%. That the $1,300 a month that you were paying that you could afford is now $2,600 a month, and you can't afford that.
Chris,
and,
I got
and that's how it happened.
I mean, just my question to both of you brothers, and I just, did the person who had the payment just balloon and burst on them like that? Did they have any control on that? Was it part of their culture? Could a cultural explanation explain them losing their home?
Right. No, I mean, clearly not. Right. Fatherlessness didn't write the policies that allow for predatory lending. Right.
That's absurd.
It's silly. Now, so let me say this though, and really this is where the term predatory lending I think comes from. Is the idea is that you have somebody who is preying on the lack of knowledge of someone else, or the condition that somebody else is in, and so on and so forth. That's what predatory lending is, right? That being said, I'm going to sound like somewhat like a broken record, because I'm going to take it back to, how does the Bible apportion responsibility, right? It makes me think of that passage. I want to say it's Proverbs chapter 11, maybe 11:9, I think it is, where it talks about an unjust weight is an abomination to the Lord. An unjust weight is an abomination to the Lord. So in that time, if you got a weighted scale that gives an unfair, rendering, and somebody buys something from you, and they get less than what you, it's unjust. Whether the person knows about it, regardless of the person who purchases it, you should not be doing that. It's unethical.
Adam,
right?
you're contradicting Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell says you don't have to buy it.
What?
Him and Milton Friedman, nobody put a gun to your head and made you do it.
That's what I'm getting at, though, and that's my point. Is that the ethics of, let's say you as a salesperson, somebody who's a merchant of some sort. The ethics of your behavior is independent of whatever's going on in terms of the buyer, right? I'm saying your behavior is unethical. Whether the person knows about it, doesn't know about it, whatever, you ought not to be doing that. That's what the Bible talks about. When you think about the concept of interest, that's why you didn't have interest in Israel like that. Right?
Yeah, this is good American value.
Yeah, you don't have surety, going on. You know what I'm saying? Because we know that it cuts against. There's something more about it. It cuts against, human flourishing and well-being and so forth. It's not going to work out well.
Y'all talking tonight.
That's why we didn't have it, right? In Israel, I should say. So anyway,
zero interest loans, baby, zero interest.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. When it comes to responsibility, right? Again, there's a responsibility for the person who's the merchant, right? That's independent. However, if you get over on somebody, that doesn't absolve you of your responsibility. You still wrong. You know what I'm saying? And so again, Larry Elder has this myopic understanding of moral responsibility that centers around individual responsibility. You know what I'm saying? But the problem is that when you compare that to the biblical picture of moral responsibility, it's much broader than just that which applies to the individual. You know, if I come up, and I used to do jujitsu back in the day. So let's say if I come up and break, Chris Samuel's arm. Sorry for this example. Just come off the top of my head. So let's say if I break, I know how to break people's arms. I can come up and break his arm. Now I could say to you, well, if you knew jujitsu, you could have got out of that hole, right? You could have if you knew what you was doing, but you didn't. I'm still wrong for breaking your arm. Just because you didn't know or didn't get out of the hole doesn't absolve me from the fact that I shouldn't have broke your arm, right? It's more responsibility that he's just bungling all the way through his interview. Last thing I want to say real quick, and this is one of those things, and I'm not saying it's only Larry Elder, but Larry Elder, man, and he's slick with it. In a weird way, I have to give him credit. He's definitely a spin doctor, and he's slick with it, because if you listen to the way he described it, it's like this case was presented to Citibank, and the Citibank was like, "Oh, the heck with it, we'll just give him the loans." Is that true?
No.
you always got to ask that question with Larry. Is that really what happened? Is it really true that Citibank was like, forget it, we'll just give him the loans? Or is it the case that enough evidence was brought to bear such that one could reasonably think that they were legally responsible, and then they changed the policy? I seriously doubt.
I.e., we broke the law. My bad.
My bad.
We got to look good. We don't have to fix it.
Come
but
on,
we got to
man.
look good. We got to look
My
good.
bad. Hey, my bad. But let me give you these special loans.
Right. I don't know
a special loan,
man.
Don't you want this $250,000 house over that $130,000?
Right. Ain't nobody over Citibank saying just the heck with it. No. And he does that several times. I won't say something. He does that more than once, because he did the same thing when he talked about Barack Obama. He made this whole case about how like everything was cool, or people thought that racism was cool, or done away with, I should say, when Barack Obama got elected. But because Barack did things like comment about the Trayvon Martin situation and so on and so forth, then voters were saying after that, oh man, he made things worse. Is that really true? Is it really true that Barack Obama was just this meddler and stir up of racism, and he made things work? Or is it the case that before Barack said anything about Trayvon Martin, people believed that Trayvon Martin was a victim of a racial hate crime at the hands of what's his name, Zimmerman? Right. Is it really true? The way that he spun that? No, it's really not. But he's slick with it. I give him credit. He'll say something real quick and make it seem as though he creates his own narrative. And if you're not being careful, you could easily be sucked in by it.
Yeah.
There's some questions in the chat that do too. But go ahead.
Hey. So there was there was a comedian named Bill Burr, and he does this one stick where he talks about getting a bad read, where like he explains how it happens, and you go, okay, that makes sense. And then he explains how you can say it in a way that accentuates other words, and by putting it that way, it sounds completely different and bad. And he's like, I got a bad read. That's Larry Elder. He's giving him bad reads.
He's a bad read, bro.
You know what's up,
Larry Bad Read Elder.
Very bad. Hey, yeah, okay. It's been 2 hours, and so we close this up. And I saw that Luke Gowdy had a couple questions earlier, and he's been interacting a little bit in there.
Which one which of his questions you want to play with?
You can put this last comment that he put up about
Asians or whatever.
About the Asians, right? Like
blacks and whites. Yeah, I'm just looking at
right. Yeah, I mean, and it's cool. I get it. You know what? I don't know this person, so I
right.
give it a benefit. Like, okay, just for the break. Okay, so was it yesterday? It was Wednesday.
Here it is.
So 2 days ago, I did a show on BK Apologist channel on wisdom. Go look it up, because like what you're saying here about how blacks and whites can adopt Asian values. The list of values that you gave, I don't see those as anything inherently wrong with that list of values. But as a Christian, I have the values of God, and some of those values in some ways reflect God's values, but God's values is so much greater than that. God's values also encompasses generosity. As a matter of fact, the central ethic of Christianity is to love your neighbor as yourself. It's to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is likewise to love your neighbor as yourself. But loving your neighbor as yourself in Jewish tradition was actually emblematic of both of those. In other words, to love God is to love your neighbor. That's kind of how they saw it. And so often they would just say the one, love your neighbor as yourself, instead of saying both of them together. You can read that in like Romans chapter 13, James chapter 2. You can read that in the Gospels as well. So with that being the case, I think that Christians should adopt Christian values, and biblical values help us to not only care about ourselves and our own plight and our own advancement, but to care about the advancement of others and to see the advancement of others as equally valid and important as our own advancement. So I don't know if you're a Christian, Luke. We're Christians. And if you are a Christian, I'd encourage you to check out Romans chapter 13, James chapter 2. I forget where it's at in the gospel. I think Mark chapter 13 is one of the places that it's at in the gospels when the rich ruler comes and asks Jesus a question about how to inherit the kingdom of God. As a matter of fact, there's a general sense in which Jesus says how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. And if you go back and you read the prophets, in the prophets, often in the Old Testament, prophets, as they were critiquing Israel, they were critiquing the wealthy leaders and political leaders of Israel. And they would say things like in Micah, you sleep on these elaborate, nice, really nice beds while you oppress the people in your neighborhood. You eat this really good food while you oppress the employees that work for you. Isaiah 58. So Malachi chapter 3. So there's always these critiques of that encompasses social dynamics to where it's hard for the rich to enter the kingdom of God because usually they care so much about their own selfish plight and they're so greedy for their own advancement that they don't care about their neighbors. And then the Bible contrasts this statement of how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom it is with statements like in James chapter 2, where he says, have not God chosen the poor of this age to inherit eternal life? And there's this repeated message by Jesus and his apostles that poor people, the message of good news of Jesus' rule as king appeals to poor people. So anyway, some food for thought. You guys can jump in if you like. Bible don't lie either, my buddy. Are you a Christian, Luke? Just out of curiosity, because are you a Christian? If you could answer that question, that would be helpful. Go ahead, Matthew. Let's bring us in. Let's land the plane.
Okay.
You got any final comments?
Well, I mean, it's just like what you said. Look, all truth and everything good and perfect comes from above. I don't believe in specific Asian quote unquote values. I mean, I think there are such things that are good values that are not unique. I don't think these values are unique to any one group. I think what I do see is that Asians are being weaponized to basically undercut the conversation that we're having about the culpability of a nation, right? And I mean, I don't even give it. I don't even give the assertion credence. Truth of the matter is, we're all created in the image of God. I think there's something beautiful about each and every culture. I don't think that God gave it all to any one person, any one thing. I think that when Asian Christians and African American Christians and Caribbean American Christians come together and white Christians come together, we see the beautiful tapestry that makes up the kingdom of God. And I think that I don't think it's a very Christian thing to do, to pit cultures against each other. So I do wonder if that brother is a Christian, but I really appreciate I appreciate the wisdom that you just offered, Chris. And I need to make sure me and you are communicating a little more, because I just feel like I've been lacking in some of that drip that be coming off of you from time to time. But no, I mean, like I said, I agree with what you said, and like I said, I appreciate it. But I also think and somebody mentioned it in the comment area, that when we talk about Asians, like, who are you talking about, right? Are you talking about people from Vietnam? Asian culture? I don't think there's any thing as Asian culture. Asians are different. A person from Vietnam or the Philippines is different from a person from China. So like,
Indians are Asian.
yeah, India. Like, what are you talking? What are you talking about? And I think the sloppiness happens um, when the assertion is really aimed at undercutting the conversation. So I would caution against that. But before we close, I just wanted to offer the floor back to our guest Adam, and we really appreciate Adam for coming on here. Sorry that Pastor Washington was not able to make it, but he told me that he'll try to get with us in the near future, and we probably would have still been going on if he was on here, because yeah. But Adam, what you got, my man?
Yeah, sorry, I was still here that whole time. I just was having some trouble with my camera and my phone. I mean, my computer's about to die, so I gotta be quick. I just want to say, real quick, to Luke Goddard. Actually, I am interested to see if he's a Christian or not. I'm not familiar with him, so I don't know. That being the case, I do think, man, I don't know if I can really say anything, better than what Chris said. Is that what we ought to do is adopt Christian values, biblical values. We ought to be the kind of people and be image bearers the way the Bible describes for us to be. I think that's what we need to do. That being the case, I also want to say that I don't want to negate the fact that there are things that we can learn from other cultures. I think that's fantastic. I love what you said, MJ. How cultures can be this beautiful tapestry. When they're functioning the way that I think they were, that the humans were created to function, then I think that we end up with cultures that are complementary to one another as opposed to leverage against one another. So when it comes to, for example, like collective economics, I think you do see that probably more commonly amongst Asians, people of the Arabic, backgrounds, other communities. I think that they probably do function together in that regard, more so than African Americans. I think that's an example of something that African Americans could do a better job with. So there's no doubt about there's things that the cultures can learn from one another. That being said, I do think that at the end of the day, I'm not striving to be Asian. I'm striving to be like Jesus. I'm saying, like that. That's the template, right? He's the image of God. That's who we ought to be ultimately looking towards. And I think that, to kind of bring things full circle, that if we're following the Larry Elders of the world, then we won't be. We will miss the boat when it comes to engaging the matters of this world in a manner that looks like Jesus. And we will mishandle a biblical account of what justice and moral responsibility looks like. We will get involved in a blame game that suits our earthly ends, as opposed to looking for truth and really approaching things the way that somebody with the heart of God would. And so I think that's really where the voice needs to be. I would just encourage people, man. It's just crazy to me, and I love my brothers and sisters in Christ out here, man. But some of y'all will be quick to run to a Larry Elder, a Candace Owens, or I forgot the other lady that you named, real quick, and skip over a multitude of Black Christians that are faithful in their churches and seeking after the heart of God and involved in spreading the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom. You will skip over a slew of folk and go holler at Thomas Sowell for some answers. I don't, for the life of me, I can't understand it.
Atheist Thomas Sowell.
Atheist Thomas Sowell.
That
man don't even rock with God like that.
This not only do you not rock with God, this guy's whole shtick is cosmic justice is incomprehensible. Go tell that to Jesus.
Go tell, right? Colossians 3, please. Can we talk about that, right? At the end of the day, Thomas Sowell, who you can see the naturalistic the implications of naturalism in his works.
He's a social Darwinist.
He really, for goodness sake. and y'all cats will ride with this dude before consulting with your brother in Christ who's sitting down the pew from you. Man, come on, y'all.
Like,
Come
come
on,
on.
man.
We
Come on,
we
man.
are, and my whole the reason why I'm on this crusade is because I know what most of you are capable of when it comes to apologetics, but there is such a stronghold that has a lot of your minds when it comes to this issue of the country and this issue of politics that is baffling that you would follow like a pig following slop the social Darwinist Thomas Sowell.
Right.
It's baffling.
And the
But
crazy thing is, I've been listen. Like if you go back and follow, if you go back and look at like some of my music, I used to do Christian hip hop. I'm saying if you look at my music, if you just look throughout, my shows and stuff like that, like I've been a critic of black culture since like 2000. Like I've been saying the stuff that we need to tighten up. You're saying like I mean when it comes to like BET culture, I've been on that. Like if you want to go hard in the paint for biblical morals, I don't care what the context is. I'm with it. I'm down. I'm just saying that this
He was on
portion of the
that
story, y'all.
black evil television. That Aaron Magruder.
So I got bars, I got bars for everybody. Trust me, I really do. I'm just saying that, yeah, man, hey, man, Larry Elder, that ain't it, man. We gotta do better, dog.
Hey,
Come
just
on,
read
man.
your Bible, people. It's real
Read
simple.
the
It's
Bible.
like
Read the
if
Bible.
you just like you will be surprised the things that the Bible says. I posted this in the back chat earlier. I'm gonna read this real quick. This Leviticus 4:13. It says, if the whole Israelite community sins unintentionally and does what is forbidden in any of the Lord's commands, even though the community is unaware of the matter, when they realize their guilt and the sin they committed becomes known, the assembly must bring a young bull as a sin offering and present it before the tent of meeting. Just think about that. Like I'm confident that if somebody said that America is blind today, all America can't be blind. How could all of America be blind?
Man,
Individuals in America can be blind, but the whole country can't be blind. Yeah, here we are in the Bible, and the whole Israelite community is sinning unintentionally and then realizes that they're sinning. It's like it's not that complicated.
of course that can be the case.
It's
Of
not.
course it can.
But
Right.
you'd be surprised because they can't. Our culture is hyper individualistic. We struggle with understanding communal consequences. But even though it's right in front of us, it's like
Let me say this too, and I'm going to say something that, to be honest with you, when I really started wrestling with it, was kind of scary on the one end, but then it just kind of gave me a different perspective. Think about Peter, right? So Jesus is about to go to the cross, down the cross and so forth. And then Peter is like, Lord, let it not be so, because Jesus is talking about going to, he's alluding to giving his life over and so forth. And Peter's like, nah, don't let it be so. And then Jesus responds, Peter's like, get thee behind me, Satan. Right? Now, I want you to think about Peter in that situation. I'm certain that Peter, in his mind, he was not thinking like, I'm going to be used by the devil and I'm going to say something to disrupt, to deter, the King of Kings from going to fulfill this piece, da, da, da. Like Peter wasn't thinking all that. Like in his mind, he probably had the best of intentions. He wanted to say something, to care for Jesus in that instance, to express his love for Jesus and care, so on and so forth. And even in those good intentions, he still, essentially, I mean, Satan was speaking through him, I guess, right? I said that to say that as scary as it is, our minds can be susceptible to the worst of demonic influences, even at what seems to be our best of intentions. The enemy of our souls, like we're so broken. Like without Christ, we're so it's like the word says, the heart of man is desperately wicked. Like who can know it? Like we are all, susceptible, to being manipulated, by the enemy of our souls. That's a reality, and so we ought to always be loving God with our minds, right? We ought to always be conferring our minds over to the lordship of Jesus Christ. And if we're not careful, anybody can be susceptible to negative influences, even demonic influences, right? So I agree with Matt Jackson to kind of bring it around. I do think that there are people who have such a love for this country, the flag, or whatever it may be, that they perhaps are opening themselves up to influences that are flat out not of God. they're not the only ones. I mean, people can be influenced by all sorts of things. I mean, we all have to be on that watchtower of our mind, making sure that the lordship of Jesus Christ is what's steering the ship, as opposed to things that we've opened our hearts to. We all have to do that. It just so happens that for some people, what's on the altar of their heart is ethnicity. For some other people, what's on the altar of their heart is nationality. For other people, it's money. It can be a number of different things. Watch out for idolatry. It can come in various different forms, y'all.
All right, that's all I got, you wonderful people. We have gone for about 2 hours and 40 minutes. And I'm not gonna lie to you. When Adam come on the channel, you might have to listen to this in 3 settings because it's normally that good.
Or just that long, because
Well,
y'all know how me and BK do, and we like to talk. So
back in the day, I think me and Adam did a stream where it was almost 3 hours one time.
Oh, I'm sure,
but it was good.
Hey, listen, all I know is Mike Holloway and Divine Prospect went for 6+ hours. I'm pretty sure that's the record.
They got the belt. Yeah,
they got the belt.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they're gonna lose it anytime soon.
Right. That's like LeBron James with the scoring title. Like, nobody's gonna break that anytime soon.
Right. Hey, before we go, though, you gonna be speaking at a conference coming up. Are they still is it still open for people to sign up for it?
Oh, you're talking to me? Yeah, I'm
talking you. Yeah, you.
Yes, sir. Right. Yeah. So I got a couple conferences. Well, like 3 coming up this month. So I've got the BIC Theology Conference. Check with Matt Castillo on that. The BIC Theology Conference that's coming up. That's going to be. I'll be there September. Gosh, I'm messing up. It's either the 14th or the 15th, whatever that Friday is. I think it's the 15th, I believe. I'll be speaking there. Yes, that's the 15th, right? But they're going from the 15th and the 16th. I believe the 17th as well. So definitely that's in Baltimore. You can definitely check that out. Registration's still open. Also, the very next day,
next day,
scheduling blunder on my end, but the very next day I'll be on September 16th. I'll be in Texas, and it was Saluda, Texas, or Salado, I think is right. I'm messing that up, but
I think it's Salado.
Salado for the unapologetic conference. Check. So that's with check with Eric Hernandez on that. I believe registration is still open for that. And then also on the 20, this is going to be the 23rd as a virtual event that I'll be part of, talking about parenting and Afrocentric cults. So we're going to be talking about the BRICS movements, Hebrew originalism, Comedicism, probably get into some Nation of Islam. You guys know the usual suspects. But this will be a group, particularly for African American mothers. I was approached by somebody who was concerned about African American moms not being aware of the groups that their sons are being drawn into. So we're going to do something about that. Anybody is welcome to join. That registration is open. I'll be having something on my channel about that pretty soon. So yeah.
All right. Matthew, what you got coming up?
More violence. Me and Nick Quint have been planning to really talk about the systemic nature of sin, right? And I think Chris is going to also probably hop in on that because look, Adam has pointed out in several of his talks, and I think Adam might have been the first to kind of point this thing out, is a lot of times we don't understand the nature of racism in America because we really don't understand how sin works. And so me, Nick, the good Reverend, and Apologist of Detroit, we'll be talking about sin as a cosmic power and entity that affects the environment, not only affects human beings, but affects the environment and how God, through his son, Jesus Christ, is destroying sin's power, rule, and reign. And so we're going to be doing that. I'm finishing up the book review for Dr. Douglas Groteis.
The book.
7,000 words ain't no book.
AKA the book.
I just wanted to promo this right here. This is in regard to that cosmic sin piece, and just I think a robust understanding of the effects of the gospel. Man, I think it's York Moore is his name. York Moore wrote this book, Making All Things New. It's phenomenal. It's really, really, really good.
Awesome. I'm
Do I
gonna
know
have to, I'm gonna
York
have to
Moore?
get it.
Is that our York Moore?
That's right. Yep.
Oh yeah, I know. I met him in DC at the digital thing. At the digital thing. Yeah, it was cool. Our
Oh
York
yeah.
Moore cool. Yeah, you know what? Our York Moore started the chapter of university that I'm running now on Wayne State
Really?
University. Yes, he
Oh
started.
wow. Okay.
He was one of the early missionaries for
I would
university.
love
Yeah,
to meet that guy, man. I would
you
love to
you
meet that
weren't
guy.
there in Washington because he was there in Washington. He was one of the speakers.
Really?
Him and what's her name? Sarah Yo. Was it Sarah Yo? She's
I
like a
must not have
social.
been there because if I was, I definitely would have, hollered at him, man. Because
It was a
I
good time.
really,
Larry was
really
there, and
appreciated his work. Yeah.
yeah, it was a few people there. Anyway, I'm speaking on October the 13th at the Contenders Conference here in Detroit. I'm speaking on biblical justice. And so it's a subject I'm very passionate about, and I'm always trying to wrap a practical picture around so that people can see it for what it is and practice it and make it a lot more easy for them to participate and practice it. So I'm excited about that. It's a 2-day conference. BK Apologist going to be there. Damon is going to be there. Damon has a breakout session for preaching, and I'm his teacher's assistant. So that's going to be interesting. I'm a TA for a day.
That's
But
cool.
anyway, yeah, that's going to be October 13th and 14th. We're going to be doing some promo videos coming up over the next few weeks. Right now, if you sign up, it's only $20 to sign up for the conference. It's going to be people from all over the country here. If you're in the Bodega group, it's a bunch of people from that group that's going to be here. So I'm super excited because it's just going to be so many people from all over the country converging here on Detroit. And last year, the conference was phenomenal. And I'm expecting very much the same this year. So Contenders Conference, if you're friends with me on Facebook, or hit me up or apologistindetroit@gmail.com if you want more information on that. Highly recommend that you come and attend. It's an awesome conference and it includes lunch.
You can't beat that. Yeah.
Can't beat that. Good
All
socializing
right.
too. Yeah.
Well, with that being said, I'm your host, MJ Jackson, with Adam Coleman, Scott Lane, and the Apologist in Detroit.
Guess who's going to jail tonight?
And and with that, we will be doing this again, and we will have Pastor Brandon on with us one of these good days. But shout out to Pastor B.
God's gonna post my bill.